The old boardroom of Harrington Systems fell silent. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust particles floating between adversaries. Eleanor Harrington stood tall, her silver-streaked hair framing a face etched with determination. Across the polished oak table, James Whitfield's smile never reached his eyes. "I've waited 40 years for this moment, Ellie," James said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Harrington Systems won't exist after today." Behind Eleanor stood an unlikely pair, a weathered man in a suit that had seen better days and a small girl clutching a tablet computer. Senator Harrison observed from the corner, his military posture unmistakable even in civilian clothes. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "You've underestimated us, James. You always have." Wow. 6 days earlier, the basement archives were pitch black, save for the feeble glow of a dying phone. Eleanor Harrington's salt and pepper hair clung to her tear-streaked face as she stared at the small pill bottle in her hand. The prestigious CEO of Harrington Systems, the woman who had graced the cover of Fortune magazine and pioneered American software security, sat alone on the cold concrete floor contemplating the end. 40 years of her life, 40 years of building on her father's legacy, all of it to be dismantled, repackaged, and absorbed by global tech in less than a week. The steady hum of the building's ancient ventilation system masked her quiet sobs. Then came a different sound. Footsteps. Heavy, measured footsteps approaching down the corridor outside the archive room. Eleanor froze hastily, wiping her tears with the cuff of her designer blouse. No one was supposed to be here. Not at this hour, not in this forgotten corner of the building's substructure. The footsteps stopped just outside the steel door. A knock followed. "Hello, is someone in there?" "Boom." The board meeting had ended at precisely 5:47 p.m. Eleanor Harrington watched as they filed out of the conference room, none meeting her eyes. Only James Whitfield remained behind, his hand on her shoulder, a practiced look of concern on his face. "Ellie, it's just business. You know that." 40 years of friendship compressed into those hollow words. Her CFO, her confidant, the godfather to her son, now the architect of her company's demise. "Take the weekend, clear your head. We'll find you a position on the advisory board. Your legacy will be respected." Legacy, as if she were already dead. Eleanor stood at the window of her corner office, watching Boston's financial district transform into a constellation of lights as dusk descended. The Harrington Systems building, designed by her father in the 1980s, renovated twice under her leadership, stood as a monument to American innovation. By Monday afternoon, it would belong to global tech. Her phone chimed with a calendar reminder: board vote, Monday, 2 p.m. Final approval of the acquisition, a formality at this point. The decision had already been made in golf courses and private dining rooms where she hadn't been invited. Eleanor grabbed her purse and headed for the executive elevator. Instead of ascending to the parking garage, she pressed B3, the deepest sub-level housing the original archives from when Thomas Harrington had founded the company. If Harrington Systems was to die, she would first visit its birthplace. Frank Miller winced as he knelt beside the maintenance elevator's control panel. His right knee, ibuprofen, shrapnel damage from Desert Storm, protested sharply. Arthritis was setting in earlier than he'd expected, though 30-plus years of carrying tools up and down service stairs hadn't helped. "Stevens, I found the problem," he said into his radio. "Sensor malfunction on B3. Give me 20 minutes. The night security supervisor's voice crackled back. "You got it, Miller. Just you down there tonight." "Always is." Frank didn't mind the solitude. Night shifts meant extra pay, and Sarah needed braces next year. At 53, Frank Miller had adapted to his station in life. Maintenance supervisor wasn't the future he'd envisioned when he was programming systems at IBM in the 80s or developing security protocols at Microplex in the 90s. But when the 2008 crash came, followed by Lisa's cancer diagnosis, choices had narrowed quickly. 15 years at Harrington Systems, keeping the lights on the elevators running, the plumbing functional. Invisible work that enabled the visible success of others. He'd made peace with that. Frank replaced the faulty sensor, his fingers still possessing the dexterity that had once typed thousands of lines of code daily. He closed the panel and tested the system. The elevator hummed back to life, digital display showing normal function. One more task completed. One more day's pay earned for Sarah. The apartment in Dorchester wasn't much, but Frank had made it home. 2 bedrooms, a combined living kitchen area, and windows that faced another brick building. The rent was manageable, the neighborhood reasonably safe, and the superintendent understood when payments occasionally arrived a few days late. Frank turned his key in the lock, surprised to see light spilling from under Sarah's door. It was past midnight. "Past your bedtime, kiddo," he called softly, setting down his lunch cooler. Sarah's door opened, revealing his daughter in dinosaur-patterned pajamas, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. At 8 years old, she had her mother's delicate features, but Frank's intense blue eyes and, unfortunately, his stubborn determination. "Dad, you won't believe what I found." Excitement made her voice breathless. "I was practicing with that old programming language you showed me, and I found this weird pattern in the code." Frank smiled despite his exhaustion. While other parents worried about too much screen time, he worried about his daughter hacking the school's grading system before 4th grade. "Let me see," he said, following her to the desk where her second-hand laptop glowed with lines of code. On the screen was a section of the DOS operating system that he had helped develop decades ago. Sarah pointed to a segment that indeed contained a pattern, not random but deliberately inserted. That's, that's actually what they want," he said softly. "I wrote that." Sarah's eyes widened. "You put a secret signature in DOS, Dad. That's in like every computer from the 80s. "Not every line," he corrected with a small smile. "Just this subsystem, just this small corner of history." "That's so cool." She looked at him with newfound appreciation, and Frank felt a familiar ache in his chest. Pride mingled with regret for the career that could have been, for the recognition his work had never received. "It was a different time, Sarah. We built things to last back then. Wasn't about getting rich quick or making flashy apps. We were laying down the foundation of a new world." He ruffled her hair. "But it's way past your bedtime, young lady. School tomorrow." As Sarah reluctantly prepared for bed, Frank moved to the kitchen area, opening a cabinet above the refrigerator. Behind a row of canned goods sat a leather portfolio, old worn at the edges, filled with papers, designs, algorithms, concepts he'd developed over decades in the industry, but had never had the opportunity to implement. Ideas that might have changed things had he not been sidelined by corporate politics and economic downturns. Sometimes late at night he still took them out. Not out of bitterness, but to remind himself that he had once been part of something important, that his mind had once created things of value. "Dad," Frank quickly closed the cabinet. Sarah stood in her doorway clutching a stuffed triceratops, a gift from her mother before the cancer progressed. "What is it, sweetheart? Do you ever miss it, being a programmer instead of fixing things?" Frank considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He never patronized Sarah's curiosity. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but fixing things matters too. The world needs builders and maintainers both. Without people like me, all those fancy offices full of programmers would be sitting in the dark." Sarah nodded, processing this perspective. "I'm going to build something important someday. Something that lasts." "I know you will," Frank said, his throat tightening unexpectedly. "Now go to sleep." After tucking her in, Frank settled at the kitchen table with bills spread before him. Electricity, rent, medical payments still lingering from Lisa's treatment. Sarah's school supplies. The braces looming next year. He'd make it work. He always did. Eleanor's phone screen illuminated as she checked the time. 9:32 p.m. The soft blue glow revealed a corridor that hadn't seen a thorough cleaning in decades. The regular maintenance staff only ventured down here for essential repairs. The company's digital archives had long since replaced the need for physical document storage. Or so everyone believed. She moved forward, her footsteps echoing against concrete. The dim emergency lights cast long shadows, creating ghosts out of filing cabinets and forgotten office furniture. Her destination lay at the end of the northeast corridor, a section marked Storage Unit 7 on the building plans but labeled Archives in her father's old notes. The weight of the pill bottle in her purse hung heavy against her hip. She'd filled the prescription 3 months ago after the first whispers of Global Tech's interest in acquisition reached her. Just a precaution, she'd told herself. An exit strategy. She never thought she'd actually consider using it, but that was before today's board meeting. Before she'd watched James present the financial projections that painted her leadership as obsolete. before Margaret Chen had unveiled her modernization strategy that would effectively erase 40 years of Harrington's unique approach to software development. Eleanor reached the end of the corridor and faced a nondescript metal door with a simple keypad lock. She entered the six-digit code 070482, the date she'd founded the company, and heard the satisfying click of the mechanism releasing. The door swung open with surprising ease, revealing not the small storage room indicated on the building plans, but a much larger space. Her father's secret, the true archives of Harrington Systems. When Thomas Harrington had worked on the Apollo program, he developed a near-paranoid habit of documenting everything. This meticulous record-keeping had transferred to his daughter's company, resulting in a physical archive that chronicled not just Harrington's history, but pivotal moments in American computing history. Contracts, schematics, correspondence, prototype designs, the authentic story of an industry that had transformed the nation. Eleanor stepped inside, her hand finding the light switch by memory. Nothing happened. The power had been disconnected. Another quiet move in the corporate chess game being played without her knowledge. She illuminated her phone's flashlight instead, sweeping the beam across shelves lined with storage boxes, filing cabinets with fading labels, and glass display cases containing the company's earliest hardware. In the center of the room stood a large oak table, her father's drafting table repurposed as a workspace. Here in this hidden chamber, Eleanor had made many of the decisions that shaped Harrington Systems away from boardrooms and consultants connected to the company's roots. She moved to the far wall where a row of 5 preservation cases contained the company's most valuable historical documents. The beam of her phone light revealed the plaque beside the first case, Eagle Project classified 1987-1996. Her fingers traced the edge of the case, remembering. Project Eagle had been Harrington's breakthrough, an encryption system developed initially for military communications and is later adapted for early internet banking. It had put the company on the map, secured their first government contracts, and established Harrington as a pioneer in data security. The technology had evolved, but the core principles still underpinned much of their security infrastructure today. Or at least they had until Margaret Chen had declared it legacy architecture in need of comprehensive modernization during today's presentation. The second case contained the original handwritten business plan, scrawled on yellow legal pads in her father's cramped engineering script, and her own more fluid notation. The third held the company's first major commercial contract. The fourth, patents and awards accumulated over 4 decades of innovation. The fifth case was empty. It had been reserved for what Thomas Harrington had called the crown jewels, the ultimate innovation that would secure the company's place in history. Eleanor had never found her father's mysterious final project after his death, though rumors persisted among the old-timers that he had developed something revolutionary just before his heart attack in 1995. She placed her phone on the table, the light casting upward to create eerie shadows across the ceiling. Then she reached into her purse and removed the pill bottle, setting it beside the phone with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. 40 years, she whispered to the empty room. 40 years of my life. The building plans she'd memorized never showed a second door to this room. Yet as she ran her hands along the back wall, her fingers found a slight depression in the concrete, a seam. Curious despite her despair, Eleanor pressed against it. A section of wall swung inward with the heavy resistance of long disuse, revealing another chamber beyond, smaller with a single metal desk and what appeared to be ancient computer equipment covered in dust cloths. A secret room within the secret room, her father's private workspace. Eleanor stepped through the doorway, her heart suddenly racing with unexpected discovery. The room smelled of dust and old paper, but also faintly of her father's pipe tobacco preserved somehow in this sealed chamber. She pulled away one of the cloths, revealing an IBM computer that hadn't been state-of-the-art since the Reagan administration. "What were you working on, Dad?" she murmured, running her fingers over the keyboard. The sound of the outer door closing made her freeze. Then came the distinctive click of the lock engaging. Eleanor spun around, rushing back to the hidden doorway, but the mechanism had engaged automatically. She was sealed inside the innermost chamber, her phone, and ironically the pill bottle, left on the table in the outer room. She pushed against the wall section, but whatever release mechanism existed was not evident from this side. "No, no, no." She pounded against the concrete, panic rising in her throat. "Hello, is anyone there?" The silence that answered was absolute. The basement was deserted at this hour, No one knew she was here. No one would look for her until Monday at the earliest, and by then the board vote would be complete. Global Tech would begin their takeover. Everything her father had built, everything she had dedicated her life to would be dismantled, repackaged, and absorbed into the corporate behemoth that was systematically swallowing America's tech heritage. In the darkness of the sealed room, Eleanor Harrington, the queen of software, who had once graced the cover of Fortune magazine, sank to the floor and wept for the first time since her father's funeral. The tears came silently at first, then in racking sobs that echoed off concrete walls that had stood since World War II. She didn't know how long she sat there curled against the wall, her designer suit collecting dust from a floor that hadn't been swept in decades. The darkness was nearly complete save for a thin line of light seeping beneath the hidden door, the glow of her abandoned phone slowly dimming as its battery drained. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy measured approaching down the corridor outside the archive room. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, moving to the hidden doorway. "Hello," she called, her voice breaking. "Is someone there? I'm trapped in here." The footsteps paused, then came a knock on the outer door. "Hello, anyone in there?" A man's voice, deep with a slight roughness of age. "Yes, I'm locked in. Please, can you open the door?" A pause. "Ma'am, this door needs a code. Do you know it?" 070482, Eleanor called, pressing her ear against the concrete. July 4th, 1982. She heard the beeps of the keypad, then the click of the lock releasing. Light flooded the outer archive room as the door swung open. "Hello," the man called. "I'm in here. There's a hidden room. I'm trapped inside." More footsteps, then silence. "I can see the seam," the man said finally, his voice closer now. "But I don't see how to open it. Is there a switch or something?" "There must be. I pressed somewhere on this wall, and it opened, but I can't find the mechanism from this side." "Hang on, let me check the outer wall." Eleanor heard him moving around the archive room, then a low whistle of appreciation. "Quite a collection you've got out of here, mammish yam. Please, just find the switch." "Sorry, right." More sounds of movement. "You said you pressed on the wall. Maybe it's a pressure plate or—" There was a soft click, and the hidden door swung outward, revealing a man in a gray maintenance uniform holding a flashlight. He was tall, with broad shoulders, slightly stooped with age. His face weathered but handsome in a rugged way. Silver hair cut in a military short style. Deep blue eyes registered surprise and recognition. "Ms. Harrington." Eleanor stepped through the doorway, her legs unsteady after hours on the concrete floor. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Miller, Frank Miller, building maintenance." He offered his hand, then seemed to think better of it, noticing the grime on his work gloves. He removed them and extended his hand again. "Sorry about that. Wasn't expecting to find the CEO in a hidden room on a Friday night." His handshake was firm, his palm calloused. A working man's hand. She noticed a faded tattoo on his forearm beneath his rolled-up sleeve. Military insignia of some kind. "Not many people know about this room, Mr. Miller," Eleanor said, trying to regain her composure, brushing dust from her skirt in a futile gesture. "I imagine not. Not on any building plans I've ever seen." His eyes moved past her to the inner chamber, curiosity evident, but he made no comment. Instead, he glanced at the table where her phone and the pill bottle sat illuminated in the beam of his heavy-duty flashlight. There was a moment of uncomfortable recognition in his eyes. He understood immediately what the pills were for, but he simply reached for her phone. "Battery's almost dead," he said, handing it to her. "Got a charger in my office upstairs if you need it." Eleanor took the phone, slipping it into her pocket, then quickly retrieved the pill bottle, avoiding his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. How did you know someone was down here?" "Doing my regular rounds. Thought I heard something." He gestured toward the door. "Power's out in this section. Been meaning to check the breaker, but it's not a priority area according to management." The way he said management carried a weight of unspoken commentary. "Well, I appreciate your thoroughness," Eleanor said, moving toward the exit. "I should be going." Frank Miller didn't move from the doorway. "Ma'am, forgive me for asking, but are you all right?" The unexpected concern in his voice nearly broke through Eleanor's hastily reconstructed composure. "I'm fine. Just got accidentally locked in while retrieving some old documents." He nodded slowly, clearly not believing her, but respectful enough not to challenge the obvious lie. "It's past 10, Ms. Harrington. Building's empty except for security up front. Can I walk you out?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. That would be helpful, thank you. As they walked in silence through the dim corridor, Eleanor found herself studying this man who had appeared like an apparition at her lowest moment. His movements were measured efficient, a man accustomed to physical work but carrying himself with unexpected dignity. Two strangers from opposite ends of the corporate hierarchy united briefly in the forgotten substructure of an empire about to fall. Single Dad Rescues Beautiful CEO Part 2. The Turning Point and First Twist. They walked in silence through the maintenance elevator corridor, their footsteps creating a syncopated rhythm against the concrete floor. The emergency lights cast long shadows ahead of them, and Eleanor was acutely aware of the man beside her, a presence in her building for 15 years that she had never noticed until tonight. The maintenance elevator was still stuck at the basement level, its doors open like a gaping mouth in the darkness. "This thing's been acting up for months," Frank commented, shining his light into the elevator shaft. "Keep telling them it needs a complete overhaul, not just patches." "Them?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious despite her emotional exhaustion. "Facilities management, new company that took over the contract last year. Cut corners everywhere they can." He said the last words with quiet disdain. "We'll take the service stairs. More reliable." He led her to an unmarked door that opened onto a concrete stairwell. As they began to climb, Eleanor noticed Frank favoring his right leg slightly. "You're limping," she observed. "Old injury, acts up sometimes, especially when the weather is changing." He didn't elaborate further, and Eleanor didn't press. They reached the ground floor, emerging into the polished marble lobby that stood in stark contrast to the utilitarian basement. The night security guard looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his face at the sight of the CEO emerging from the service entrance with the maintenance man. "Evening, Ms. Harrington, everything okay?" the guard asked. "Yes, John. Mr. Miller was just helping me retrieve some archived materials." She turned to Frank. "Thank you again." Frank nodded, his expression unreadable in the lobby's dim night lighting. "Ma'am," he said simply, then turned to leave. Something made Eleanor call after him. "Mr. Miller?" He paused, looking back. "How long have you worked here at Harrington?" A slight smile creased his weathered face. "Coming up on 15 years now." 15 years, she repeated, "and we've never met." "No reason we would have, ma'am. I work nights mostly, keep the place running while everyone else goes home." And there was no bitterness in his voice, just simple fact. Eleanor felt a sudden irrational desire to continue the conversation, to delay her return to the empty penthouse apartment where the weight of the day's betrayal waited to crush her again. "Do you have time for a coffee, Mr. Miller? I'd like to hear more about the building maintenance issues. As CEO, I should be aware of these things." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by cautious assessment. His eyes glanced briefly toward her purse where the pill bottle now rested. "There's a diner around the corner, still open. Better coffee than the break room stuff." 20 minutes later, they sat in a vinyl booth at Rosie's All-Night Diner, a throwback establishment that had somehow survived the gentrification of downtown Boston. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a name tag reading Dottie, had greeted Frank by name and brought him the usual without asking: black coffee and a slice of apple pie. "Come here often?" Eleanor asked, warming her hands around a ceramic mug of surprisingly good coffee. "Few nights a week on my dinner break," Frank replied. "Been coming here since before it was retro to do so." He nodded toward the waitress. "Dottie's husband was in my unit during Desert Storm. Good man." "You served in the Gulf War?" Frank nodded. "Army 82nd Airborne, long time ago now." Eleanor studied him with new interest. "And before Harrington, what did you do?" A shadow passed over his face. "Worked in tech, actually. Software engineer at IBM in the 80s. Then some smaller firms. Was at Microplex Systems until 2008. Microplex, they went under during the financial crisis, didn't they? Along with my pension and 30 years of specialized expertise." He took a sip of coffee. "But you didn't ask me to coffee to hear an old man's career complaints, Ms. Harrington." "Eleanor, please." "Eleanor." He said her name carefully as if testing it. "Frank." She nodded, then looked out the window at the dark street lit by the occasional passing car. "The board is selling Harrington Systems to Global Tech. The vote is Monday, but it's already decided." Frank's expression remained neutral. "Been rumors about that for months in the maintenance department. Sorry to hear it's happening." 40 years of independence ended in a 3-hour meeting. Eleanor's voice was hollow. My father founded Harrington in our garage. Did you know that classic American success story? MIT engineer decides he can build better systems than anyone else. Mortgages his house, works 18-hour days. I was 15 when he started the company. Did my homework on one end of the workbench while he soldered circuit boards on the other. Frank nodded. Different time, when things were still made here. We never took the company public. That was deliberate. My father believed that answering to shareholders would force the kind of short-term thinking that kills innovation. She laughed bitterly. Instead, we have a board full of family friends and industry experts who just voted to sell everything to a conglomerate that will strip mine our technology and discard the shell. Technology changes, Frank said carefully. Companies come and go. Been happening since the Industrial Revolution. Is that supposed to be comforting? Just history. He cut a piece of pie with his fork. Though some parts of history shouldn't be forgotten so quickly. Something in his tone caught Eleanor's attention. You said you worked at IBM in the 80s, doing what? Systems programming, low-level stuff mostly, worked on the team that developed parts of DOS. Eleanor's eyes widened. You worked on DOS, the operating system. Frank nodded, a ghost of pride crossing his features. Small part of a big team. But yes, that's the foundation of modern computing. You helped build that. Like I said, small part. History doesn't remember most of the builders, just the architects. He took another bite of pie, but I didn't mind. It was good work, important work. Eleanor was silent for a moment, reassessing the man across from her. Not just a maintenance worker, but a software pioneer who had helped create the technological landscape she had built her company within. A man who had fallen from the cutting edge of innovation to fixing elevators and checking circuit breakers. What happened, she asked finally. Between IBM and now, Frank's face closed slightly. Life happened, Eleanor. The industry changed, got younger faster. Then came outsourcing, downsizing. 2008 finished what was left of my career path. He shrugged. Got a daughter to support. Maintenance work is steady. No shame in it. No, of course not. I didn't mean to imply. No offense taken. He finished his coffee. But since we're asking personal questions, mind if I ask one? Eleanor tensed slightly, then nodded. That room downstairs, the hidden one. What's in there that's worth? He paused, choosing his words carefully. Worth coming back to after hours. Eleanor studied his face, searching for judgment or pity, but found only genuine curiosity. History, she said finally. My father's legacy. The real story of Harrington Systems, not the sanitized version that will appear in Global Tech's press release next week. And what will you do now? After the sale, the question hung in the air between them. Eleanor glanced down at her purse where the pill bottle waited. Frank followed her gaze, then looked back at her face, his blue eyes steady. There's always another chapter, Eleanor. Easy to say. Didn't say it was easy, said it was true. He placed his fork down. My wife died in 2016. Cancer. Left me with an 8-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical debt on top of a foreclosure notice. Thought about ending things myself. The simple admission delivered without drama or self-pity caught Eleanor off guard. What stopped you? Sarah, my daughter. A smile softened his weathered face. Couldn't leave her alone in this world, so I found another way. Always another way. Eleanor looked away, uncomfortable with the transparent understanding between them. This stranger, this maintenance maid who had once helped build computing history, had seen through her in a way that friends of 40 years had not, or perhaps had seen but chosen to ignore. I should go, she said, reaching for her purse. Frank nodded, signaling for the check. I'll walk you to your car. That's not necessary. Humor and old soldiers' habits, ma'am. My mother raised me to see ladies safely to their transportation. Outside, the April night was unseasonably cool. A brisk wind channeled between the downtown buildings. Eleanor's Tesla waited in its reserved spot behind the building, gleaming black under the security lights. Nice car, Frank commented. It's just a car. Eleanor unlocked it with her phone. Thank you for the coffee, Frank, and for finding me earlier. He nodded, his expression serious. You going to be okay tonight? The question was direct, his meaning clear. Are you going to use those pills? I'll be fine, she answered. Not entirely sure if it was the truth. If you don't mind some unsolicited advice, Frank said, sleep on any big decisions. World looks different in the morning light. Always has. Eleanor nodded, then impulsively reached into her purse and extracted a business card offering it to him. If you ever need anything, Frank, a reference or help with your daughter's education, anything. He took the card, studying it for a moment before tucking it into his shirt pocket. Appreciate that, though I suspect you might have bigger concerns come Monday. Yes, well, Eleanor opened her car door. Good night, Mr. Miller. Ma'am. He stepped back, watching as she slid into the driver's seat. Just before she closed the door, he spoke again. That hidden room, I'm guessing not many people know about it. No, just me as far as I know. My father built it secretly during renovations in the 90s. Frank nodded thoughtfully. Might be worth another look before the new owners take over. Old secrets have a way of becoming valuable when the landscape changes. With that cryptic comment, he gave her a respectful nod and turned, walking back toward the service entrance of Harrington Systems. His slight limp was barely noticeable in his measured stride. Eleanor watched him disappear into the building before starting her car. The digital dashboard illuminated with Harrington's proprietary interface, one of the company's smaller innovations licensed to luxury automakers, soon to be rebranded as Global Tech Technology, no doubt. As she drove through the nearly empty downtown streets toward her Beacon Hill apartment, Eleanor found herself thinking not about the board's betrayal or Monday's looming finality, but about Frank Miller, a man who had helped build the foundations of modern computing, now walking the midnight corridors of someone else's technological empire. A man who had faced his own abyss and chosen to step back from the edge. For the first time since the board meeting, Eleanor felt something other than despair. Not hope exactly, but curiosity. What had her father hidden in that inner chamber? What secrets might still lie dormant in Harrington's forgotten archives? She had intended this weekend to be her last. A time to put affairs in order, to craft the perfect resignation letter, to empty the pill bottle, and exit with the dignity that the board had tried to deny her. Now she found herself considering a different possibility. Frank's words echoed in her mind. Always another chapter. By the time she reached her apartment, the pill bottle no longer seemed like the only option. There was something else to do first. A mystery to solve, a legacy to uncover. Monday's corporate execution might still be inevitable, but Eleanor Harrington was no longer ready to go quietly into oblivion. Not until she had examined every possibility, uncovered every secret, explored every hidden room in the house her father had built. As she stepped into her empty apartment, the weight of solitude settled around her shoulders like a familiar cloak. The sleek, minimalist furnishings, chosen by an interior designer to project success and sophistication, suddenly seemed sterile and impersonal. Had she ever really lived here, or merely existed between board meetings and international flights? Eleanor moved to the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. The city lights reflected on the dark water, a constellation of human ambition and perseverance. Somewhere out there, Frank Miller was returning to whatever modest home housed himself and his daughter. A man who had helped build the modern world, now invisible to it. How many others like him were there, pioneers erased from the official narratives, their contributions forgotten, while figureheads claimed the glory? How much of Harrington's success had been built on unacknowledged brilliance? Eleanor removed the pill bottle from her purse and carried it to the bathroom, where she emptied its contents into the toilet and flushed. The soft whirlpool carried away what had just hours ago seemed like her only escape. Always another chapter, she whispered to her reflection. The face that stared back was tired, the carefully maintained facade of corporate confidence stripped away to reveal the vulnerability beneath. But in her eyes, a familiar determination began to rekindle, the same look her father had worn when facing seemingly insurmountable technical challenges. Eleanor Harrington had 3 days before Global Tech took ownership of her life's work. 3 days to discover what her father had hidden in that secret room. 3 days to find a way to preserve what mattered most. She reached for her phone and set an alarm for 500 a.m. There would be time for rest later. Now she had history to uncover and perhaps a future to reclaim. Saturday morning arrived with the soft persistence of early spring sunshine filtering through Eleanor's bedroom windows. For a moment, in the gentle haze between sleep and wakefulness, she forgot the corporate execution awaiting her on Monday. Then reality crashed back, the weight of it pressing against her chest like a physical force. But something was different this morning. The despair that had driven her to the basement archives with a bottle of pills had transformed overnight into a smoldering determination. She reached for her phone 5:58 a.m. Her alarm hadn't even sounded yet. By 7:30, Eleanor had showered, dressed in casual clothes that would have shocked her executive team, jeans, a simple blouse, and comfortable shoes, and was pulling into the parking garage beneath Harrington Systems. Weekend security was minimal. The young guard at the desk barely glanced at her ID badge before waving her through with a respectful, "Morning, Ms. Harrington." The building felt different on a Saturday, hollow, expectant, like a theater between performances. Her footsteps echoed in the marble lobby as she bypassed the executive elevator and headed for the service stairs Frank had shown her the night before. The maintenance elevator was still out of commission, its doors now sealed with yellow caution tape. Eleanor descended to the basement level, moving with purpose through the dim corridors. At the archive room door, she paused, entering the familiar code, 070482, and felt a surge of relief when the lock disengaged with a satisfying click. The room was exactly as she had left it the night before, her phone's flashlight still sitting on the oak table where Frank had found it. The hidden door to the inner chamber stood partially open, revealing the darkness beyond. Eleanor had come prepared this time, bringing a powerful lantern from her emergency kit and a portable phone charger. She illuminated the inner chamber, revealing what she had only glimpsed the night before. Her father's secret workspace, preserved like a time capsule from the mid-90s. The IBM computer was actually more advanced than she had initially thought, a prototype system that had never been mass-produced. Beside it sat stacks of notebooks filled with Thomas Harrington's distinctive handwriting, technical diagrams, and pages of complex mathematics. On the wall hung a framed photograph of the original Harrington Systems team from 1982. 5 people standing in front of a garage, her father in the center, Eleanor herself as a teenager off to one side, looking both awkward and proud. She began a systematic exploration, carefully examining each notebook, each folder, each piece of technology. Hours passed as she lost herself in her father's private thoughts and innovations. Some concepts she recognized as the foundations for technologies Harrington had eventually brought to market. Others seemed to be experimental dead ends, but nothing that explained why he had maintained the secret room. Nothing that could be considered the crown jewels he had hinted at before his death. Until she opened the bottom drawer of the metal desk. Inside was a single red folder marked with a simple eagle silhouette, the symbol of Project Eagle. Eleanor's heart quickened as she lifted it out, feeling the unexpected weight of its contents. Inside was not the technical documentation she had expected, but a series of letters and handwritten notes exchanged between her father and someone identified only as FM. The correspondence detailed refinements to the Eagle Project's encryption algorithm, brilliant insights that had transformed the project from merely excellent to revolutionary. The handwriting of this mysterious FM was precise, methodical, the work of an engineer's mind. The final letter, dated just 2 weeks before her father's fatal heart attack, mentioned a complete overhaul of the core sequencing that will make Eagle impenetrable for decades to come. Eleanor stared at the initials, a suspicion forming. FM Frank Miller. It seemed impossible. And yet, a noise from the outer archive room made her freeze. Footsteps, then a familiar voice. "Ms. Harrington, you in here?" Eleanor emerged from the hidden chamber to find Frank Miller standing in the doorway, still dressed in his maintenance uniform, despite it being a Saturday. He didn't seem surprised to find her there. "Security called," he explained. "Said you'd come in early. Thought I'd check if you needed anything." His eyes moved to the red folder in her hand, then quickly back to her face. Eleanor held up the folder. "FM, that's you, isn't it? You worked with my father on Project Eagle." Frank's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps regret. "Been a long time since I've seen that folder." "You knew about this room all along," Eleanor said, the realization dawning. "That's why you asked me about it last night. You've been here before." Frank nodded slowly. "Your father and I worked together occasionally. Off the books. He had ideas that the board wouldn't approve, approaches that were too experimental for corporate comfort. This was our workspace. Why didn't you tell me this last night? Would you have believed a maintenance man claiming to be your father's secret collaborator?" Frank shrugged. Besides, those days are long gone. Ancient history. Eleanor opened the folder, extracting a page of handwritten calculations. This encryption algorithm, you helped design it. Portions of it. Your father was the visionary. I just helped with some of the mathematical heavy lifting and implementation details. Frank stepped further into the room, his posture relaxing slightly as memories returned. We called it Eagle because your father said it would soar above anything else in the market. He was right. But your name never appeared on any of the patents, any of the documentation. Frank's smile held no bitterness, only a weary acceptance. That was the arrangement. I was still at Microplex, then bound by non-compete clauses. Your father paid me privately as a consultant. We both knew my career wouldn't survive if Microplex found out I was moonlighting for a competitor. Eleanor studied the man before her with new eyes. Not just a maintenance worker who had once been a programmer, but a genuine pioneer who had helped create Harrington's most successful security platform, the foundation upon which much of their current technology was built. Frank, this algorithm is still in use today. Modified, updated, but the core principles remain. Your work has been protecting data for decades. He nodded, a hint of pride breaking through his careful composure. Good to know it stood the test of time. And now Global Tech is going to buy it, rebrand it, and probably dismantle it to integrate into their own systems. Eleanor's voice hardened. They'll erase every trace of where it came from, who built it. That's business, Frank said, though his eyes reflected her anger. Progress marches on, old innovations get absorbed or discarded. No, Eleanor said firmly. That's not progress. That's corporate consolidation masquerading as innovation. They're not improving on our work. They're acquiring it, strip mining it, and discarding the shell. She placed the folder on the oak table and began pacing the archive room, her mind racing. There has to be more. My father talked about crown jewels in his final months. Something revolutionary he was working on. Something in this room. Frank hesitated, then moved to the hidden chamber. May I? Eleanor nodded, following him into the smaller room. Frank went directly to the ancient IBM computer, running his hand almost reverently over its dusty case. Thomas was working on something big before he died, he confirmed. An evolution of the Eagle algorithm, but applied to a completely different domain. He called it Phoenix. Phoenix, Eleanor repeated, rising from the ashes of Eagle. Something like that, but it was theoretical, incomplete. He died before we could implement it fully. Frank's eyes scanned the room with the focused intensity of someone searching for a specific memory. He kept the core concepts separate from everything else, paranoid about corporate espionage, even within his own company. Where? Eleanor asked, a new urgency in her voice. If it's in this room, we need to find it. Frank moved to the framed photograph on the wall, the original Harrington team standing in front of the garage. He carefully removed it from the wall, turning it over to examine the back. With practiced fingers, he pried open the frame, revealing a small USB drive taped to the inside of the backing. Your father was old school about security, Frank said, offering her the drive. Physical separation from network systems. Can't hack what you can't access. Eleanor took the drive, turning it over in her palm, so small to potentially contain something so valuable. Will this even work with modern systems? It's just storage. The interface is outdated, but the data should be intact. Frank glanced at his watch. My shift technically started 20 minutes ago. I should make some rounds, keep up appearances. Eleanor nodded, slipping the drive into her pocket. Frank, I need to understand what's on this drive. If it's what my father considered his greatest work, it might be what I need to fight Global Tech's takeover. Frank's weathered face revealed his internal conflict. Ms. Harrington. Eleanor, please. Eleanor, I'm a maintenance worker now, have been for 15 years. That other life, that other version of Frank Miller, he doesn't exist anymore. I don't believe in that, Eleanor said quietly. The man who helped create DOS, who refined the Eagle encryption algorithm, he's still here. I can see him right now looking at my father's old computer like a musician reuniting with a beloved instrument. Frank said nothing, but his expression softened. I know it's a lot to ask, Eleanor continued, but I have less than 48 hours before Global Tech erases 40 years of Harrington innovation. Before they erase my father's legacy. She paused. Before they erase your contributions too. Even if I wanted to help, I have responsibilities. My daughter. Bring her, Eleanor said impulsively. There's plenty of room in my apartment. She can watch TV, play video games, whatever kids do these days. A small smile tugged at Frank's lips. Sarah's not exactly your typical 8-year-old. She doesn't watch much TV. He paused, considering. But she has been asking to visit the Boston Science Museum. It's just a few blocks from here. Perfect. You take her to the museum this morning, and afterward, you both come to my place. We'll order in lunch and see what Phoenix is all about. Eleanor felt a surge of hope for the first time since the board meeting. Please, Frank, I can't do this alone. Frank Miller stood silent for a long moment, the past and present visibly wrestling within him. Finally, he reached into his pocket and produced a worn business card, the one Eleanor had given him the night before. He turned it over, wrote a phone number on the back, and handed it to her. My cell, text me your address. We'll come by around 1 o'clock. He moved toward the door, then paused. Just to be clear, I'm not promising anything. Looking at what's on that drive, that's all I'm asking, Eleanor assured him. Thank you, Frank. After he left, Eleanor remained in the archive room for another hour, gathering select documents and photographs that chronicled Harrington's true history. If Monday's corporate execution couldn't be avoided, at least she would preserve the authentic record of what her father had built. As she finally prepared to leave, her phone chimed with an incoming message. She expected it to be from Frank, but instead saw James Whitfield's name on the screen. Ellie, we need to talk. Brunch at the Charles, 11:30. Important developments. Eleanor stared at the message, anger and betrayal rising afresh. James, her CFO, her supposed friend for 4 decades, who had led the charge to sell her company, who had sat beside her through her divorce, her son's college graduation, her father's funeral, only to stab her in the back when global tech dangled the right incentives. She typed a response, sorry, busy today. Monday is soon enough. Then, gathering the materials she had collected, she locked the archive room behind her and headed for her car, the mysterious USB drive secure in her pocket and Frank Miller's phone number clutched in her hand like a lifeline. The Beacon Hill apartment felt different when Eleanor returned, no longer a mausoleum for her corporate success, but a base of operations for whatever came next. She cleared her dining room table, spreading out the documents she had retrieved from the archive. Then, with almost reverent care, she inserted the USB drive into a secure, non-networked laptop she kept for sensitive company business. The drive contained a single encrypted file named simply Phoenix PXE. Eleanor tried several passwords based on her father's usual patterns, but none worked. After the third failed attempt, a security prompt appeared. Wingspan. It was a verification question, not a password request. Eleanor frowned, uncertain of the expected response. Her father had used dozens of security questions over the years. What was special about Wingspan? The answer came to her suddenly. A childhood memory of her father taking her to the airport to watch planes take off and land. She had asked which bird had the most impressive wingspan, and he had told her about the American bald eagle, its wings stretching over 7 feet. Magnificent, he had said, built for both power and precision. She typed 7-2. The file began to decrypt. What emerged was not a complete software package or even a coherent set of technical specifications, but rather a conceptual framework. Pages of theoretical mathematics, flow diagrams, and Thomas Harrington's notes about applying encryption principles to a completely new domain, logistics and supply chain management. Eleanor scrolled through the documents, trying to understand her father's vision. Phoenix wasn't just an encryption system. It was a complete reimagining of how secure data could flow through physical supply chains, protecting everything from military equipment to consumer goods against tampering, counterfeiting, and theft. It was revolutionary, but also incomplete. Her father had died before he could fully develop the implementation strategy. The concepts were sound, the mathematics elegant, but translating theory into functional software would require someone with exceptional understanding of both encryption algorithms and practical coding, someone like Frank Miller. Eleanor checked the time, 10:45 a.m., more than 2 hours before Frank and his daughter would arrive. She used the time to organize the Phoenix materials, breaking down the concepts into more digestible segments. As she worked, she found herself drawn into her father's vision, seeing the elegance of his approach, the forward-thinking nature of a system designed decades before supply chain security became the critical issue it was today. She was so absorbed in the documents that the doorbell's chime startled her. Eleanor checked her watch. Only 11:15. Frank wasn't due for nearly 2 more hours. Through the peephole, she saw James Whitfield standing in the hallway holding a bottle of wine and wearing the concerned expression he had perfected over decades of corporate diplomacy. Eleanor considered not answering, but perhaps there was value in hearing what James had to say, in understanding the full scope of what she was up against. She opened the door. "Ellie, thank God," James said, stepping forward, as if to embrace her. Eleanor took a step back, maintaining distance. His smile faltered. "I was worried when you didn't answer my texts. May I come in?" Eleanor hesitated, then stepped aside. As James entered her apartment, his eyes immediately went to the dining table covered with archived materials and the laptop displaying the Phoenix files. "What's all this?" he asked, setting the wine bottle on a side table. "Research," Eleanor said, simply moving to partially block his view of the screen. "What are you doing here, James? I told you I was busy." "This couldn't wait until Monday." James's expression turned grave. "The board has moved up the vote. It's happening tomorrow afternoon instead." Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. "Sunday, that's not possible. The bylaws require emergency provision, Ellie. Global Tech's deadline moved up. It's their final offer. Take it tomorrow or they walk." He spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I came as soon as I heard." Eleanor studied his face, the face she had trusted for 40 years. Something didn't add up. "Who moved the deadline?" "Margaret Chen. I spoke with her 2 days ago, and she gave no indication. It came from higher up. Their CEO called me directly this morning." "Called you, not me." Eleanor's suspicion deepened. "I'm still the CEO of this company, James." An almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. "Of course, that's why I'm here, to make sure you're prepared for tomorrow." James moved toward the dining table, trying to get a better look at the documents. "What are you working on that's so urgent it couldn't wait for brunch?" Eleanor positioned herself between James and the table. "Just reviewing some company history for my remarks tomorrow." "History," James smiled thinly. "That's always been your focus, hasn't it?" "The past, while the rest of us look to the future." "Some parts of history shouldn't be forgotten so quickly," Eleanor said, echoing Frank's words from the diner. James's expression flickered, something like recognition quickly masked. "Well, I won't keep you. Clearly you're busy preparing." He moved toward the door, then paused. 1 o'clock tomorrow, Ellie, boardroom. Don't be late." After James left, Eleanor stood frozen, her mind racing. The accelerated timeline changed everything. Whatever plan she was forming with Frank, whatever secrets Phoenix might hold, they now had less than 24 hours instead of 48. She grabbed her phone and texted Frank. "Timeline changed. Board vote tomorrow at 1 p.m. Still coming at 1 today." The response came almost immediately. "We'll be there, leaving museum now." Eleanor looked at the mess of documents on her dining table, the partial decryption of Phoenix on her laptop. She had hoped for a weekend to unravel her father's final project, to formulate a strategy based on whatever they discovered. Now they had hours, not days. She returned to the Phoenix files with renewed urgency. As she delved deeper into her father's notes, a particular reference caught her attention. A mention of collaboration with FM on the core security architecture. Eleanor opened one of the technical diagrams, studying the notation in the margins. There in the corner, in handwriting, she now recognized was a small note. "Integrated quantum resilience per TH request, FM3 and 1595. Quantum resilience in 1995. Years before quantum computing became a serious research field. Frank Miller hadn't just been a collaborator on Project Eagle. He had been pushing the boundaries of cryptographic theory decades ahead of his time. Working quietly in this hidden room with her father, he had been developing concepts that the industry was only now beginning to implement. And for 15 years, he had been walking the halls of Harrington Systems as a maintenance worker, invisible to the executives and engineers who built their careers on foundations he had helped create. The doorbell rang. Eleanor opened the door to find Frank and a small, serious-looking girl with the intelligent blue eyes. "Eleanor, this is my daughter Sarah," Frank said. "Sarah, this is Ms. Harrington, the lady I told you about." "The one whose company is being stolen," Sarah said matter-of-factly, extending her hand with adult formality. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Harrington. Dad says you might need our help." Eleanor smiled, charmed by the child's directness. It's nice to meet you too, Sarah. And yes, I could definitely use some help. She gestured them inside. Please come in. I've ordered sandwiches from the deli downstairs. They should be here any minute. Sarah entered first, her eyes widening as she took in the apartment's expansive view of Boston Harbor. Wow, you can see everything from here. Almost everything, Eleanor agreed, leading them to the dining room where the Phoenix documents were arranged. Did you enjoy the Science Museum? It was acceptable, Sarah said with the critical assessment of a young prodigy. Their coding exhibit needs updating, though. They're still showcasing programming techniques from 2015. Frank gave Eleanor an apologetic smile. Sarah has strong opinions about computer science education. I like strong opinions, Eleanor said, genuinely amused. They usually come from strong minds. Sarah beamed at the compliment, then immediately gravitated toward the spread of technical documents on the dining table. What's all this? That, Frank said, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, is grown-up work stuff that we're going to help Ms. Harrington with after lunch. The doorbell rang again, so the deli delivery. While Eleanor paid for the food, Frank discreetly examined the Phoenix materials, his expression growing increasingly focused as he recognized the significance of what he was seeing. Over lunch, Sarah dominated the conversation with detailed descriptions of the museum's exhibits, particularly the shortcomings of their technology displays. Eleanor found herself genuinely enjoying the girl's enthusiasm and critical thinking, so reminiscent of her own childhood passion for taking things apart to understand how they worked. Dad says you started your company when you were just a teenager, Sarah said between bites of her sandwich. That's pretty cool. My father started it, Eleanor corrected. I joined officially after college, though I was involved from the beginning. Dad helped build DOS, Sarah announced proudly. That's like super important in computer history. Did you know that? Eleanor smiled. I recently learned that, yes, your father is being modest about his contributions to technology. Frank looked uncomfortable with the attention. Ancient history, like I said. But history matters, Eleanor insisted. That's why I've been digging through the company archives. Our past shapes everything we build today, whether we acknowledge it or not. After lunch, Sarah settled in the living room with a book she had brought. Not a children's story, Eleanor noticed, but a technical manual on Python programming that would challenge most college students. Frank joined Eleanor at the dining table, finally giving the Phoenix materials his full attention. For the next hour, they barely spoke, as Frank absorbed the details of Thomas Harrington's final project. Eleanor watched his face, noting the moments of recognition, the subtle nods of appreciation for particularly elegant solutions, the occasional frown at conceptual gaps. This is, Frank finally said, looking up from the documents. This is remarkable. Your father was working at least 20 years ahead of his time. This framework anticipates problems in supply chain security that the industry is only beginning to grapple with now. But it's incomplete, Eleanor said. That's what I'm seeing. The theoretical foundation is solid, but the implementation strategy is missing. Frank nodded. Thomas died before he could bridge that gap between concept and execution. He tapped a section of complex mathematics. This is the core algorithm, a variation on what we developed for Eagle, but with additional layers for physical verification protocols. Well, could it be completed? Eleanor asked, the critical question hanging between them. Could Phoenix rise again? Frank leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he considered the challenge. Maybe, with the right team, the right resources. It would take time, though, more time than you have before tomorrow's board vote. What if we're not trying to build the complete system? Eleanor suggested, leaning forward intently. What if we just need a working prototype? Something compelling enough to show the board to demonstrate that Harrington still has revolutionary technology in development. A proof of concept, Frank mused. It's possible, but even that would require intensive coding testing. We have until tomorrow, Eleanor said, aware of how desperate she sounded. It's not enough, Frank said gently. Not for me, anyway. I haven't done serious coding in years. My skills are rusty, outdated. From the living room doorway came Sarah's voice. I could help. They both turned to find her standing there, the programming manual closed in her hands, her expression serious beyond her years. Sarah, Frank began, his tone carrying a warning. This is complicated adult work. I saw the mathematics, she said, approaching the table. It's an encryption algorithm with physical verification protocols. like blockchain, but for real objects. She pointed to a section of the documentation. This part is incomplete. You need to bridge the gap between the theoretical construct and practical implementation. Eleanor stared at the child, astonished. You understand this? Frank sighed, a mixture of pride and concern crossing his features. Sarah is, special. She has an unusual aptitude for patterns mathematics programming. The school psychologist calls her a savant, exceptional cognitive abilities in specific domains. I'm good with codes, Sarah said simply. Always have been. Dad's been teaching me programming since I was 5. Eleanor looked from daughter to father, seeing not just the physical resemblance, but the same quiet intensity, the same methodical approach to problems. Frank, is she really capable of understanding this level of cryptography? Understanding it, yes, Frank acknowledged. Implementing it, that's different. She's still learning practical coding skills, professional development environments. But you know those things, Sarah pointed out. You could do the implementation if I help with the algorithm refinement. It's still not enough, Frank said, shaking his head. Even together, we'd need days, maybe weeks to create a working prototype. Proper testing equipment, development servers. I have those, Eleanor said quickly. Harrington maintains a complete R&D lab on the 14th floor. State-of-the-art equipment isolated from the main corporate network for security. And you have access even on weekends. I'm still CEO until tomorrow afternoon, Eleanor reminded him. My biometrics override any security protocol in the building. Frank looked torn, glancing from the Phoenix documents to his daughter, then back to Eleanor. This is a lot to take on. Even if we manage to create something, there's no guarantee it would change the board's decision. No, Eleanor agreed, but right now global tech is buying Harrington because they think we're past our prime, that our innovation peaked years ago. If we can show that Thomas Harrington's final project was decades ahead of its time and that we have the capability to complete it, it changes the narrative. It might not stop the sale, but it could change the terms, preserve more of the company's independence. Frank was silent for a long moment, visibly wrestling with the decision. Then Sarah spoke again, her young voice carrying surprising conviction. Dad, remember what you always tell me about the Wright brothers, how they built their plane in a bicycle shop with nobody believing in them? Frank's expression softened. You said innovation doesn't come from big companies with lots of money. It comes from people who believe in something even when everyone else says it's impossible. Sarah placed her small hand on her father's arm. We should help Ms. Harrington. It's the right thing to do. Eleanor watched this exchange with a tightness in her throat, moved by the child's simple wisdom and Frank's evident struggle between caution and conviction. Finally, Frank nodded, decision made. We'll need access to the R&D lab tonight, after regular security shifts change. Less chance of attracting attention that way. I can arrange that, Eleanor said, relief flooding through her. We'll enter through the executive garage. My credentials will get us in without being logged in the main visitor system. And we'll need development equipment, specific software packages, testing environments. Whatever you need, Eleanor promised. Make a list. As Frank began writing down technical requirements, Sarah returned to the living room, resuming her study of the programming manual with renewed purpose. Eleanor watched her for a moment, marveling at the unlikely allies she had found in this maintenance worker and his remarkable daughter. Frank, she said quietly, thank you for this. I know it's a lot to ask. He looked up from his list, his blue eyes serious. I'm not doing it just for you. Some things are worth preserving, worth fighting for. Your father understood that. He built things to last, to matter. A shadow crossed his face. There's not much of that left in this industry. It's all quarterly profits and planned obsolescence now. Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. This isn't just about saving my company, is it? It's about preserving a vision of technology that serves something more than shareholder value. Maybe, Frank acknowledged, or maybe I'm just an old programmer who wants one more chance to build something that matters. He returned to his list, adding several more items. We should get to the lab by 8 tonight. That gives us about 17 hours before the board meeting. 17 hours to resurrect Phoenix, Eleanor said, the challenge energizing rather than daunting her. For the first time since the board meeting, she felt something like hope flickering in her chest. The path ahead was uncertain, the odds of success slim. But she was no longer facing the abyss alone. In Frank Miller and his daughter, Sarah Eleanor Harrington, had found something unexpected. Not just technical expertise, but a shared belief in building something that would last, something worthy of the legacy Thomas Harrington had entrusted to them all. The drive contained a single encrypted file named simply Phoenix PXE. Eleanor tried several passwords based on her father's usual patterns, but none worked. After the third failed attempt, a security prompt appeared, Wingspan. It was a verification question, not a password request. Eleanor frowned, uncertain of the expected response. Her father had used dozens of security questions over the years. What was special about Wingspan? The answer came to her suddenly. A childhood memory of her father taking her to the airport to watch planes take off and land. She had asked which bird had the most impressive wingspan, and he had told her about the American bald eagle, its wings stretching over 7 feet. Magnificent, he had said, built for both power and precision. She typed 7-2. The file began to decrypt. What emerged was not a complete software package or even a coherent set of technical specifications, but rather a conceptual framework. Pages of theoretical mathematics, flow diagrams, and Thomas Harrington's notes about applying encryption principles to a completely new domain, logistics and supply chain management. Eleanor scrolled through the documents, trying to understand her father's vision. Phoenix wasn't just an encryption system, it was a complete reimagining of how secure data could flow through physical supply chains, protecting everything from military equipment to consumer goods against tampering, counterfeiting, and theft. It was revolutionary, but also incomplete. Her father had died before he could fully develop the implementation strategy. The concepts were sound, the mathematics elegant, but translating theory into functional software would require someone with exceptional understanding of both encryption algorithms and practical coding, someone like Frank Miller. Eleanor checked the time, 10:45 a.m., more than 2 hours before Frank and his daughter would arrive. She used the time to organize the Phoenix materials, breaking down the concepts into more digestible segments. As she worked, she found herself drawn into her father's vision, seeing the elegance of his approach, the forward-thinking nature of a system designed decades before supply chain security became the critical issue it was today. She was so absorbed in the documents that the doorbell's chime startled her. Eleanor checked her watch, only 11:15. Frank wasn't due for nearly 2 more hours. Through the peephole, she saw James Whitfield standing in the hallway holding a bottle of wine and wearing the concerned expression he had perfected over decades of corporate diplomacy. Eleanor considered not answering, but perhaps there was value in hearing what James had to say, in understanding the full scope of what she was up against. She opened the door. "Ellie, thank God," James said, stepping forward as if to embrace her. Eleanor took a step back, maintaining distance. His smile faltered. "I was worried when you didn't answer my texts. May I come in?" Eleanor hesitated, then stepped aside. As James entered her apartment, his eyes immediately went to the dining table covered with archive materials and the laptop displaying the Phoenix files. "What's all this?" he asked, setting the wine bottle on a side table. "Research," Eleanor said, simply moving to partially block his view of the screen. "What are you doing here, James? I told you I was busy." "This couldn't wait until Monday." James's expression turned grave. "The board has moved up the vote. It's happening tomorrow afternoon instead." Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. "Sunday, that's not possible. The bylaws require emergency provision. Ellie, Global Tech's deadline moved up. It's their final offer. Take it tomorrow or they walk." He spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I came as soon as I heard." Eleanor studied his face, the face she had trusted for 40 years. Something didn't add up. "Who moved the deadline?" "Margaret Chen. I spoke with her 2 days ago, and she gave no indication. It came from higher up. Their CEO called me directly this morning." "Called you, not me." Eleanor's suspicion deepened. "I'm still the CEO of this company, James." An almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. "Of course, that's why I'm here. To make sure you're prepared for tomorrow." James moved toward the dining table, trying to get a better look at the documents. "What are you working on that's so urgent it couldn't wait for brunch?" Eleanor positioned herself between James and the table. "Just reviewing some company history for my remarks tomorrow." "History," James smiled thinly. "That's always been your focus, hasn't it? The past, while the rest of us look to the future. And some parts of history shouldn't be forgotten so quickly," Eleanor said, echoing Frank's words from the diner. James's expression flickered. something like recognition, quickly masked. Well, I won't keep you. Clearly you're busy preparing. He moved toward the door, then paused. 1 o'clock tomorrow, Ellie. Boardroom. Don't be late. After James left, Eleanor stood frozen, her mind racing. The accelerated timeline changed everything. Whatever plans she was forming with Frank, whatever secrets Phoenix might hold, they now had less than 24 hours instead of 48. She grabbed her phone and texted Frank. Timeline changed. Board vote tomorrow at 1 p.m. Still coming at 1 today. The response came almost immediately. We'll be there, leaving museum now. Eleanor looked at the mess of documents on her dining table, the partial decryption of Phoenix on her laptop. She had hoped for a weekend to unravel her father's final project to formulate a strategy based on whatever they discovered. Now they had hours, not days. She returned to the Phoenix files with renewed urgency. As she delved deeper into her father's notes, a particular reference caught her attention. A mention of collaboration with FM on the core security architecture. Eleanor opened one of the technical diagrams studying the notation in the margins. There in the corner in handwriting, she now recognized was a small note, integrated quantum resilience per TH request, FM 3-1595, quantum resilience. In 1995, years before quantum computing became a serious research field, Frank Miller hadn't just been a collaborator on Project Eagle. He had been pushing the boundaries of cryptographic theory decades ahead of his time. Working quietly in this hidden room with her father, he had been developing concepts that the industry was only now beginning to implement. And for 15 years, he had been walking the halls of Harrington Systems as a maintenance worker, invisible to the executives and engineers who built their careers on foundations he had helped create. The doorbell rang. Eleanor opened the door to find Frank and a small, serious-looking girl with intelligent blue eyes. Eleanor, this is my daughter, Sarah, Frank said. Sarah, this is Mrs. Harrington, the lady I told you about. The one whose company is being stolen, Sarah said matter-of-factly, extending her hand with adult formality. It's nice to meet you, Ms. Harrington. Dad says you might need our help. Eleanor smiled, charmed by the child's directness. It's nice to meet you too, Sarah. And yes, I could definitely use some help. She gestured them inside. Please come in. I've ordered sandwiches from the deli downstairs. They should be here any minute. Sarah entered first, her eyes widening as she took in the apartment's expansive view of Boston Harbor. Wow, you can see everything from here. Almost everything, Eleanor agreed, leading them to the dining room where the Phoenix documents were arranged. Did you enjoy the Science Museum? It was acceptable, Sarah said, with the critical assessment of a young prodigy. Their coding exhibit needs updating, though. They're still showcasing programming techniques from 2015. Frank gave Eleanor an apologetic smile. Sarah has strong opinions about computer science education. I like strong opinions, Eleanor said, genuinely amused. They usually come from strong minds. Sarah beamed at the compliment, then immediately gravitated toward the spread of technical documents on the dining table. What's all this? That Frank said, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, is grown-up work stuff that we're going to help Ms. Harrington with after lunch. The doorbell rang again. The deli delivery. While Eleanor paid for the food, Frank discreetly examined the Phoenix materials, his expression growing increasingly focused as he recognized the significance of what he was seeing. Over lunch, Sarah dominated the conversation with detailed descriptions of the museum's exhibits, particularly the shortcomings of their technology displays. Eleanor found herself genuinely enjoying the girl's enthusiasm and critical thinking, so reminiscent of her own childhood passion for taking things apart to understand how they worked. Dad says you started your company when you were just a teenager, Sarah said between bites of her sandwich. That's pretty cool. My father started it, Eleanor corrected. I joined officially after college, though I was involved from the beginning. Dad helped build DOS, Sarah announced proudly. That's like super important in computer history. Did you know that? Eleanor smiled. I recently learned that, yes. Your father is being modest about his contributions to technology. Frank looked uncomfortable with the attention. Ancient history, like I said. But history matters, Eleanor insisted. That's why I've been digging through the company archives. Our past shapes everything we build today, whether we acknowledge it or not. After lunch, Sarah settled in the living room with a book she had brought. Not a children's story, Eleanor noticed, but a technical manual on Python programming that would challenge most college students. Frank joined Eleanor at the dining table, finally giving the Phoenix materials his full attention. For the next hour, they barely spoke, as Frank absorbed the details of Thomas Harrington's final project. Eleanor watched his face, noting the moments of recognition, the subtle nods of appreciation for particularly elegant solutions, the occasional frown at conceptual gaps. "This is," Frank finally said, looking up from the documents, "this is remarkable. Your father was working at least 20 years ahead of his time. This framework anticipates problems in supply chain security that the industry is only beginning to grapple with now." "But it's incomplete," Eleanor said. "That's what I'm seeing. The theoretical foundation is solid, but the implementation strategy is missing." Frank nodded. Thomas died before he could bridge that gap between concept and execution. He tapped a section of complex mathematics. "This is the core algorithm, a variation on what we developed for Eagle, but with additional layers for physical verification protocols." "Could it be completed?" Eleanor asked, the critical question hanging between them. "Could Phoenix rise again?" Frank leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he considered the challenge. "Maybe, with the right team, the right resources. It would take time, though, more time than you have before tomorrow's board vote." "What if we're not trying to build the complete system?" Eleanor suggested, leaning forward intently. "What if we just need a working prototype? Something compelling enough to show the board to demonstrate that Harrington still has revolutionary technology in development." "A proof of concept," Frank mused. "It's possible, but even that would require intensive coding testing." "We have until tomorrow," Eleanor said, aware of how desperate she sounded. "It's not enough," Frank said gently. "Not for me, anyway. I haven't done serious coding in years. My skills are rusty, outdated." From the living room doorway came Sarah's voice. "I could help." They both turned to find her standing there, the programming manual closed in her hands, her expression serious beyond her years. "Sarah," Frank began, his tone carrying a warning, "this is complicated adult work." "I saw the mathematics," she said, approaching the table. "It's an encryption algorithm with physical verification protocols, like blockchain, but for real objects." She pointed to a section of the documentation. "This part is incomplete. You need to bridge the gap between the theoretical construct and practical implementation." Eleanor stared at the child, astonished. "You understand this?" Frank sighed, a mixture of pride and concern crossing his features. "Sarah is special. She has an unusual aptitude for patterns mathematics programming. The school psychologist calls her a savant, exceptional cognitive abilities in specific domains." "I'm good with codes," Sarah said simply. "Always have been. Dad's been teaching me programming since I was 5. Eleanor looked from daughter to father, seeing not just the physical resemblance, but the same quiet intensity, the same methodical approach to problems. "Frank, is she really capable of understanding this level of cryptography?" "Understanding it, yes," Frank acknowledged. "Implementing it, that's different. She's still learning practical coding skills, professional development environments." "But you know those things," Sarah pointed out. "You could do the implementation if I help with the algorithm refinement." "It's still not enough," Frank said, shaking his head. "Even together, we'd need days, maybe weeks to create a working prototype. Proper testing equipment, development servers." "I have those," Eleanor said quickly. "Harrington maintains a complete R&D lab on the 14th floor. State-of-the-art equipment isolated from the main corporate network for security. And you have access even on weekends." "I'm still CEO until tomorrow afternoon," Eleanor reminded him. "My biometrics override any security protocol in the building." Frank looked torn, glancing from the Phoenix documents to his daughter, then back to Eleanor. "This is a lot to take on. Even if we manage to create something, there's no guarantee it would change the board's decision." "No," Eleanor agreed. "But right now, Global Tech is buying Harrington because they think we're past our prime, that our innovation peaked years ago. If we can show that Thomas Harrington's final project was decades ahead of its time, and that we have the capability to complete it, it changes the narrative. It might not stop the sale, but it could change the terms, preserve more of the company's independence." Frank was silent for a long moment, visibly wrestling with the decision. Then Sarah spoke again, her young voice carrying surprising conviction. "Dad, remember what you always tell me about the Wright brothers, how they built their plane in a bicycle shop with nobody believing in them?" Frank's expression softened. You said innovation doesn't come from big companies with lots of money. It comes from people who believe in something even when everyone else says it's impossible. Sarah placed her small hand on her father's arm. We should help Ms. Harrington. It's the right thing to do. Eleanor watched this exchange with a tightness in her throat, moved by the child's simple wisdom and Frank's evident struggle between caution and conviction. Finally, Frank nodded, decision made. We'll need access to the R&D lab tonight after regular security shifts change. Less chance of attracting attention that way. I can arrange that, Eleanor said, relief flooding through her. We'll enter through the executive garage. My credentials will get us in without being logged in the main visitor system. And we'll need development equipment, specific software packages, testing environments. Whatever you need, Eleanor promised. Make a list. As Frank began writing down technical requirements, Sarah returned to the living room, resuming her study of the programming manual with renewed purpose. Eleanor watched her for a moment, marveling at the unlikely allies she had found in this maintenance worker, in his remarkable daughter. Frank, she said quietly, thank you for this. I know it's a lot to ask. He looked up from his list, his blue eyes serious. I'm not doing it just for you. Some things are worth preserving, worth fighting for. Your father understood that. He built things to last, to matter. A shadow crossed his face. There's not much of that left in this industry. It's all quarterly profits and planned obsolescence now. Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. This isn't just about saving my company, is it? It's about preserving a vision of technology that serves something more than shareholder value. Maybe, Frank acknowledged, or maybe I'm just an old programmer who wants one more chance to build something that matters. He returned to his list, adding several more items. We should get to the lab by 8 tonight. That gives us about 17 hours before the board meeting. 17 hours to resurrect Phoenix, Eleanor said, the challenge energizing rather than daunting her. For the first time since the board meeting, she felt something like hope flickering in her chest. The path ahead was uncertain, the odds of success slim, but she was no longer facing the abyss alone. In Frank Miller and his daughter, Sarah Eleanor Harrington, had found something unexpected. Not just technical expertise, but a shared belief in building something that would last. Something worthy of the legacy Thomas Harrington had entrusted to them all. As they prepared to leave for the Harrington Systems building, Eleanor noticed Frank examining a framed photograph on her bookshelf. Thomas Harrington accepting an award at an industry event in the early 90s. I remember this ceremony, Frank said. Your father was reluctant to attend, said the real innovators were back in the lab while the suits collected the trophies. Eleanor smiled at the memory. He hated the spotlight. Mom had to practically drag him there. She paused, studying Frank more carefully. You were there too. In the audience, Microplex had a table. That was back when... His voice trailed off, a shadow crossing his face. Back when what? Eleanor prompted. Frank hesitated, then turned to face her directly. When the industry still had room for companies like Harrington, before the conglomerate started swallowing everything. He glanced at his watch. We should gather our things. Sarah, he called toward the living room. Time to go. Sarah appeared, clutching her programming manual in a small backpack. I've been thinking about the verification protocols, she announced. If we use a distributed ledger approach instead of centralized authentication, we could eliminate 3 potential attack vectors. Frank exchanged a look with Eleanor, equal parts pride and resignation. She's been like this since she was 4. Her kindergarten teacher called us in because Sarah had corrected the math workbooks. I can see why the school uses the term savant, Eleanor said quietly. They wanted to skip her ahead 3 grades. Frank replied, his voice lowered. I refused. Being smart is already isolating enough for a kid. I wanted her to have some chance at a normal childhood. Eleanor observed the interaction between father and daughter, the protective concern in Frank's eyes, the absolute trust in Sarah's. Whatever challenges Frank had faced in his career and his personal life, he had clearly gotten one thing right, raising a remarkable child. Ready? Eleanor asked, collecting her laptop in the Phoenix materials. Ready? Sarah confirmed with solemn determination. As they headed out, Eleanor's phone chimed with a text message. James again. Ellie, we need to talk before tomorrow. Critical information about the deal structure. Call me. She silenced the phone without responding and slipped it into her pocket. Whatever games James was playing, she had more important matters to focus on. The Harrington Systems building was eerily quiet as they entered through the executive garage, using Eleanor's credentials to bypass the weekend security protocols. The R&D floor on 14 was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of emergency lighting and the standby indicators on various equipment. Eleanor led them to a secure laboratory in the northeast corner, the most advanced development environment in the building reserved for the company's most sensitive projects. Impressive, Frank commented, taking in the cutting-edge technology. Last time I worked in a lab like this, computers still took up entire walls. Eleanor moved to the central workstation and began initializing the systems. Harrington has always prioritized R&D investment even during downturns. It's one of the principles my father established that I've maintained. Frank set up his own equipment at an adjacent station connecting to the lab's secure network with the credentials Eleanor provided. Sarah explored the room with wide-eyed fascination, running her fingers lightly over the sleek equipment. Okay, Frank said once the systems were operational. Let's break this down into manageable components. We need a core algorithm implementation, a verification protocol, and a physical interface system. Eleanor, you know Harrington's existing security architecture better than anyone. You focus on integration points. I'll handle the implementation framework. Sarah, I'll work on the algorithm refinements, she supplied eagerly. The quantum resilience component needs updating to account for advancements since 1995. Frank nodded. Just conceptual work, Sarah. No actual coding without my review first. Yes, Dad, she replied with the patient tone of a child accustomed to such restrictions. They settled into a rhythm, each focusing on their assigned tasks. Eleanor found herself impressed by Frank's ability to slip back into the role of software architect. His movements at the keyboard fluid and confident, a stark contrast to the maintenance worker she had met just 24 hours earlier. Sarah, meanwhile, was lost in a world of mathematical notation, filling a digital whiteboard with equations and diagrams that Eleanor could only partially comprehend. As the night progressed, they made unexpected breakthroughs and encountered frustrating obstacles. The Phoenix concept was brilliant, but translating it into functional code required bridging decades of technological evolution. What Thomas Harrington had envisioned in 1995 needed to be reimagined for the computing environment of 2025. Around midnight, Eleanor ordered food delivered to the building security desk, then went down to retrieve it. When she returned, she found Frank standing behind Sarah, watching with undisguised pride as his daughter explained a complex mathematical solution she had devised to a problem that had stymied them for hours. She's extraordinary, Eleanor said quietly, setting down the bags of food. Frank nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and something else. Concern, perhaps. She is. Most of the time it feels like more of a responsibility than a blessing. The world isn't always kind to people who are different. I know something about that, Eleanor replied. Being a female CEO in tech, especially in the early days, it wasn't easy. But you had your father's name, his company, Frank observed, not unkindly. Sarah will have to make her own way. She'll have you, Eleanor said. That counts for a lot. They ate quickly, refueling for the long night ahead. As they worked through the early morning hours, Eleanor found herself repeatedly glancing at Frank, seeing him in a new light. The more he immersed himself in the programming work, the more he seemed to transform. The stooped shoulders straightening, the weathered face animated with intellectual engagement, the careful deference of the maintenance worker replaced by the confident decisiveness of an engineer in his element. This was who Frank Miller truly was. Not the invisible man who fixed elevators and checked circuit breakers, but a brilliant mind temporarily diverted by life's cruelties. Around 200 a.m., they had a working framework for the core algorithm, but implementing the physical verification protocols was proving more challenging than anticipated. The system needed to track objects through complex supply chains, detecting any tampering or unauthorized access. We need RFID integration, Frank muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. The old approach won't work with modern tracking systems. There's an RFID development kit in the storage cabinet, Eleanor said, moving to retrieve it. We use it for prototyping security badges. As she reached for the cabinet door, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The room tilted alarmingly, and Eleanor grabbed the edge of a desk to steady herself. Eleanor, Frank was at her side in an instant, concern etched on his face. Are you okay? Yes, just Tired, I guess. I haven't slept much since the board meeting. Frank guided her to a chair. Take a break. We've been at this for hours. We can't afford a break, Eleanor protested, though the room was still spinning slightly. The vote is in less than 12 hours. You won't be able to convince anyone of anything if you collapse from exhaustion, Frank said firmly. 10 minutes, just to sit and breathe. Eleanor nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. She closed her eyes, trying to quiet the whirlwind of her thoughts. When was the last time she had actually rested? Not just slept, but truly allowed herself to step back from the constant pressure of leadership. She opened her eyes to find Frank watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Concern, certainly, but something else too. Something warmer. Better, he asked. Getting there, she admitted. You know, it's strange. I've run this company for decades, but I can't remember the last time someone actually worried about whether I was okay. A sad smile touched Frank's lips. The higher you climb, the fewer people feel entitled to treat you like a human being instead of a position. Eleanor nodded, surprised by his insight. That's exactly it. Even my son calls me mom like it's a corporate title. Where is he now? San Francisco, venture capital firm. We talk once a month, usually about his portfolio companies. She shrugged, trying to mask the ache that came with the admission. After the divorce, he sided with his father. Can't really blame him. I was always working. The price of building something that lasts, Frank said without judgment. Was it worth it? I'm not sure anymore. Frank's gaze shifted to Sarah, who was still absorbed in her work, oblivious to their conversation. I ask myself the same question sometimes. After Lisa died, I took the maintenance job because it had regular hours, decent benefits. Meant I could be home with Sarah every night. You sacrificed your career for her. I chose her, Frank corrected. Different thing entirely. Before Eleanor could respond, Sarah's voice called out from her workstation. Dad, Ms. Harrington, I think I solved the authentication problem. They moved to Sarah's station, where she had mapped out a sophisticated approach to the verification protocol that would allow physical objects to be tracked through multiple checkpoints without compromising security. If we implement this, she explained, pointing to her diagrams, the system can detect tampering even if the attacker has legitimate access to part of the supply chain. Frank studied her work, his expression growing increasingly impressed. This is brilliant, Sarah, but how did you account for the quantum resistance factor? I didn't have to, Sarah said, a hint of excitement in her voice. That's what makes this special. The approach Mr. Harrington and you designed in '95 already had the foundation. I just extended it to work with modern infrastructure. Eleanor looked from the complex mathematics on the screen to the small girl who had devised it, feeling a renewed sense of wonder. Your daughter might have just saved Phoenix Frank. They worked with renewed energy, implementing Sarah's solution into the prototype. By 4:00 a.m., they had a functional core system that could demonstrate the basic principles of Phoenix, the secure tracking of physical objects through a supply chain with. They worked with renewed energy, implementing Sarah's solution into the prototype. By 4:00 a.m., they had a functional core system that could demonstrate the basic principles of Phoenix, the secure tracking of physical objects through a supply chain with tamper-evident verification at each step. It's crude compared to what your father envisioned, Frank acknowledged, as they tested the system on various objects around the lab. But it proves the concept is viable. With proper development, this could revolutionize supply chain security. Eleanor nodded, watching as the system successfully detected a minor tampering attempt on a sealed package. It's more than I hoped for, but will it be enough to convince the board that Harrington still has innovative potential worth preserving? We'll find out in a few hours, Frank said, saving their work to a secure drive. For now, we should rest while we can. There's a break room with couches down the hall. Eleanor agreed, realizing just how exhausted she truly was. The break room was small but comfortable, with 2 sofas and a kitchenette. Sarah immediately claimed one couch, curling up with her backpack as a pillow and falling asleep almost instantly. She can sleep anywhere, Frank said fondly, covering her with his jacket. Useful skill for a kid who spent a lot of time in hospital waiting rooms. The casual reference to their difficult past hung in the air between them. Eleanor settled on the other couch, suddenly aware of the strange intimacy of the moment. 3 people from vastly different worlds, united by a shared mission, sharing this quiet space in the pre-dawn hours. Thank you, Frank, she said softly. For all of this, I know it can't be easy diving back into this world after so long away. Frank sat in an armchair opposite her, his expression thoughtful. It's like riding a bicycle. The muscle memory is still there, even if the technology has changed. He glanced at his sleeping daughter. In watching Sarah work, it reminds me why I love this field in the first place, the pure, creative problem-solving of it. She's going to do remarkable things someday. She already is, Frank said, pride evident in his voice. I just worry about the world she'll do them in. An industry that values youth over experience, that treats people as disposable resources. Maybe we can change that, Eleanor suggested. If we save Harrington, make it a different kind of technology company. Frank's smile held a hint of gentle skepticism. One company against the tide. It has to start somewhere. They fell into comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor found her eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of the past days finally catching up with her. The last thing she saw before drifting off was Frank watching over his daughter with an expression of such tender protectiveness that it made her heart ache for all the years she had prioritized her company over such human connections. Eleanor woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The break room was bathed in morning light streaming through the small window. She checked her watch, 7:15 a.m. They had slept for less than 3 hours. Frank was already awake, making coffee in the kitchenette. He handed her a steaming mug without asking if she wanted one. Sarah, Eleanor asked, noticing the empty couch, already back in the lab, said she had an idea about improving the interface. Frank shook his head with a mixture of exasperation and pride. I've never met anyone with her energy level. Eleanor sipped the coffee, gratefully feeling the caffeine begin to clear the fog from her mind. We should get back, too. Still so much to do before the meeting. As they walked back to the lab, Frank suddenly stopped, his expression serious. Eleanor, before we go any further with this, there's something you should know. What is it? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. When I was going through those old documents last night, I found something that might be important. A memo from 1994 about a dispute between your father and another researcher at MIT, a man named Richard Whitfield. Eleanor frowned, the name triggering a distant memory. Whitfield? Wait, that was James's father. He and my dad were colleagues at MIT before Harrington was founded. I think they had some kind of falling out. It was more than a falling out, Frank said slowly. According to this memo, Richard Whitfield tried to claim credit for work they'd done together, tried to patent it separately. There was a legal battle. Your father won, but it ended their friendship. Eleanor's mind raced, connecting dots she had never noticed before. And then my father hired Richard's son years later. James became CFO when, 2010, after the previous CFO retired. Eleanor's eyes widened as she began to see where Frank's thoughts were leading. You think this is personal for him? That he's been planning this for years? I don't know, Frank admitted, but it's a hell of a coincidence that the son of the man your father defeated is now orchestrating the end of his company. They stared at each other, the implication hanging between them. Then Frank glanced at his sleeping daughter and lowered his voice. If James deliberately intercepted my messages back in 2008, if he's been positioning himself all these years just to take control of Harrington, then this isn't just a business decision, Eleanor finished. It's revenge. The weight of this possibility settled over them, casting the weekend's desperate work in a new light. This wasn't just about saving Harrington Systems as a company. It was about preserving Thomas Harrington's legacy against a deliberate attempt to erase it from history. They returned to the lab with renewed determination, only to find Sarah slumped over her workstation, her small body shivering despite the room's comfortable temperature. Sarah? Frank rushed to her side, alarm evident in his voice. What's wrong, sweetheart? Sarah lifted her head, her face flushed and eyes glassy with fever. I don't feel so good, Dad. Frank placed a hand on her forehead, his expression darkening with concern. You're burning up. He looked at Eleanor, sudden fear replacing his usual calm. She has a history of severe respiratory infections. Her immune system, since her mother's treatments. Eleanor didn't hesitate. We need to get her to a hospital. Now. The prototype, Sarah protested weakly. Can wait, Frank said firmly, gathering her into his arms. Nothing is more important than you, kiddo. Eleanor led them back to the executive elevator, her mind racing. The board meeting was in less than 6 hours. The prototype was functional but incomplete, And now Sarah was ill, potentially seriously so. Everything was falling apart just when it had begun to come together. In the parking garage, Eleanor opened her Tesla's rear door. "Get in. I know a pediatric specialist at Massachusetts General. I'll call ahead." Frank hesitated only briefly before placing Sarah in the back seat. As Eleanor drove, she made the call to Dr. Melissa Chen, a friend whose career she had supported through a Harrington Systems scholarship program years earlier. "Melissa, it's Eleanor Harrington. I have an emergency. 8-year-old girl, high fever, history of respiratory complications. Can you meet us at MGH?" She listened briefly. "Thank you. We'll be there in 10 minutes." Eleanor caught Frank's questioning look in the rearview mirror. "Dr. Chen is one of the best pediatric immunologists in Boston. She'll take good care of Sarah." "Thank you," Frank said, his voice tight with worry as he held his daughter's hand. "I should have noticed earlier. She seemed fine when we started working." "Kids can crash quickly," Eleanor said. "Don't blame yourself." They arrived at the hospital where Dr. Chen was waiting with a team. Sarah was whisked away for immediate assessment, leaving Frank and Eleanor in the waiting room, the crisis having temporarily eclipsed their mission to save Harrington Systems. "She'll be okay," Eleanor said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Dr. Chen is extraordinary." Frank nodded, his eyes fixed on the doors through which Sarah had disappeared. "She's had episodes like this before. After Lisa's cancer treatments, the chemicals affected Sarah in utero. Her immune system has always been compromised." "I didn't know," Eleanor said quietly. "Not something that comes up in casual conversation." Frank's attempt at a smile failed, worry etching deep lines around his eyes, especially between CEOs and maintenance workers. Eleanor placed her hand over his. "She's strong, Frank, like her father." He looked down at their hands and back at Eleanor's face. "You should go. The board meeting. You still have time to finish the prototype, make your case." "I'm not leaving you here alone," Eleanor said firmly. "This isn't your problem. Harrington Systems is. Right now, Sarah is the priority. The company can wait." Frank studied her face as if seeing something new there. "You mean that, don't you?" "Of course I do. What kind of person would I be if I abandoned a sick child for a corporate meeting? The kind who runs a multi-billion-dollar technology company," Frank said, but there was no judgment in his voice. "The kind who has to make hard choices every day." "Maybe I'm tired of being that kind of person," Eleanor admitted, surprising herself with the candor. "Maybe finding you and Sarah in that archive room was the wake-up call I needed." Before Frank could respond, Dr. Chen emerged from the treatment area, her expression reassuring as she approached them. "She's responding well to treatment," she announced. "Bacterial infection, not viral. We've started her on antibiotics, and her fever is already coming down." "Can I see her?" Frank asked, relief evident in his voice. "Of course, she's asking for you." Dr. Chen glanced at Eleanor. "Both of you, actually. She's quite insistent about something called Phoenix that you all need to finish." Frank and Eleanor exchanged looks, part relief, part amazement at Sarah's determination even in illness. "That's my girl," Frank said, his voice thick with emotion, always focused on the mission. As they followed Dr. Chen to Sarah's treatment room, Eleanor checked her watch, 9:17 a.m. The board meeting was at 1:00 p.m. They still had time, but barely. The prototype needed refinement testing packaging for presentation. But as she watched Frank rush to his daughter's bedside, taking Sarah's small hand in his, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Some things were more important than corporate empires, more valuable than technology patents. Some connections once formed created obligations that transcended business logic. Sarah looked up from her hospital bed, her face pale but her eyes alert. "Did you finish the authentication module?" she asked, her voice weak but determined. Frank smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Don't worry about that now, kiddo. You need to rest." "But the meeting," Sarah protested. "Ms. Harrington's company will still be there after you get better," Eleanor assured her, moving to the other side of the bed. "The doctors say you're going to be fine. That's all that matters right now." Sarah's eyes moved between the two adults, a knowing expression beyond her years crossing her features. "You like each other," she announced with the blunt directness of childhood. "That's good. Dad's been alone too long." Frank's face flushed. "Sarah, that's not—" "It's okay, Dad. Mom would want you to have a friend, especially a smart one who runs a technology company." Eleanor felt her own cheeks warm, but before she could formulate a response, Sarah's expression suddenly brightened with excitement. Wait, I figured it out. She struggled to sit up, ignoring her father's gentle, restraining hand. The authentication problem, I solved it in my dream. We don't need to rewrite the core verification protocol. We just need to add a quantum signature layer that bridges the legacy system with the new framework. She turned to Eleanor, her eyes feverish with more than just illness. Do you have paper? I need to write this down before I forget. Dr. Chen appeared at the doorway, clipboard in hand. That will have to wait, young lady. You need medication and rest, not quantum signatures, did you say? But it's important, Sarah insisted. It's the missing piece. Sarah, Frank said firmly, the doctor's right. Your health comes first. Sarah slumped back against the pillows, frustration evident on her face. Fine, but somebody needs to write this down. It's the breakthrough we need. Eleanor reached for her phone, opening the note-taking app. Dictated it to me quickly before the doctor kicks me out. As Sarah rattled off a series of technical specifications that made little sense to anyone else in the room, Eleanor dutifully recorded every word, recognizing through her limited understanding that the child might indeed have solved their most challenging obstacle, in a fever dream no less. When she finished, Sarah looked expectantly at her father. Now you can finish, Phoenix, while I'm getting better. Right, Dad? Frank hesitated, caught between his daughter's expectations and his unwillingness to leave her side. I'll stay with her, Eleanor said, making a decision. You take my car back to the lab, implement Sarah's solution, and prepare for the meeting. I'll join you as soon as she's stabilized. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Eleanor handed him her car keys and phone with Sarah's notes. Harrington is my company, but Sarah is your daughter. We each have our priorities. Frank looked from Eleanor to Sarah, conflict evident in his expression. Go, Dad, Sarah urged. Save Ms. Harrington's company. I've got the best doctor in Boston and the CEO keeping me company. I'll be fine. After another moment's hesitation, Frank nodded. He kissed Sarah's forehead, then turned to Eleanor. Thank you, he said, his voice heavy with meaning that extended far beyond the immediate circumstances. Just make Phoenix fly, Eleanor replied with a small smile. That's all the thanks I need. As Frank left, Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow at Eleanor. Since when do you prioritize a patient over a board meeting? The Eleanor Harrington I remember would have sent flowers and a get well card while rushing back to the office. Eleanor settled into the chair beside Sarah's bed, watching the young girl's eyelids grow heavy as the medication began to take effect. Maybe I'm not that Eleanor Harrington anymore, she said quietly. Maybe I'm finding my way back to someone I used to be. Someone who remembered what actually matters. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. About time. Sarah drifted into sleep, her breathing deep and regular, her small hand still holding on to Eleanor's. Outside the hospital window, the morning sun illuminated the Boston skyline, the Harrington Systems building visible in the distance. A monument to one legacy that might end today, even as new connections, new possibilities were taking shape in this quiet hospital room. Eleanor squeezed Sarah's hand gently, making a silent promise to this remarkable child and her father. Whatever happened with the board vote with Global Tech, with James Whitfield's revenge, some bonds once formed would not be broken. Some commitments transcended corporate bylaws and shareholder value. Eleanor remained at Sarah's bedside as the morning progressed, watching the girl's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep. The antibiotics were working, Sarah's fever had dropped considerably, and her breathing was easier. Dr. Chen had assured them that with proper care, she could go home by evening. Sitting in the quiet hospital room, Eleanor found herself in an unfamiliar position, away from boardrooms and strategy sessions, simply being present for another human being. When was the last time she had done that? Not checked emails while visiting her son, not taken calls during holidays, not mentally composed presentations while others spoke. She glanced at her watch, 10:22 a.m. The board meeting was less than 3 hours away. Under normal circumstances, she would be reviewing her notes, preparing counter-arguments, ensuring every detail was perfect. Instead, she was here holding the hand of a sleeping child she had known for less than 24 hours. Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Is Dad back yet? She asked, her voice stronger than before. Not yet, Eleanor said, offering a reassuring smile. He's working hard on your solution. It'll work, Sarah said with absolute confidence. I did the math 3 times in my head. Eleanor chuckled. I believe you. How are you feeling? Better. Hungry. Sarah sat up slightly, studying Eleanor with those unnervingly perceptive blue eyes. You didn't have to stay with me. Don't you have important AYO things to do? Nothing more important than this, Eleanor replied, surprised to discover she meant it. Dad likes you, Sarah announced, returning to her earlier observation. I can tell. Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Sarah, he gets this look when he talks about smart people he respects. He has that look with you. Sarah adjusted her position against the pillows. And you look at him different than you look at other people. More real. You're very observant, Eleanor said, deflecting. I notice patterns. Dad says it's my superpower. Sarah's expression turned serious. He deserves someone nice, someone who sees him. Eleanor was saved from responding by a knock at the door. Dr. Chen entered, followed by a nurse with a breakfast tray. Vital signs are excellent, Dr. Chen announced, checking Sarah's chart. Fever's down to 9.1. How's our little genius feeling? Hungry, Sarah repeated emphatically. The nurse set down the breakfast tray, oatmeal, fruit, and juice. Sarah eyed it skeptically. Hospital food, Dr. Chen said apologetically. Not exactly gourmet. I've eaten worse, Sarah said pragmatically, reaching for the spoon. Eleanor's phone chimed with a text message. Frank, Sarah's solution works. Prototype complete. Everything ready for presentation. How is she? Your dad says your solution worked. Eleanor told Sarah, typing a quick reply. They've completed the prototype. Sarah's face lit up with pride. See, I told you. He'll be so proud when he sees you, Eleanor said, putting away her phone. When can I go home? Dr. Chen stepped forward. If your next blood work looks good and you keep the food down, we can discharge you this afternoon. But you'll need to rest for a few days. Sarah's face fell. But we have to show the prototype to the board. I helped build it. Eleanor and Dr. Chen exchanged glances. Sarah, your health comes first, Eleanor said gently. Your dad and I can handle the presentation. But it was my idea, Sarah protested, then winced at the strain on her still recovering body. Dr. Chen adjusted one of the monitors. Take it easy, young lady. Your brilliant ideas will still be brilliant after you've properly recovered. Sarah subsided against the pillows, frustration evident on her face. It's not fair. I never get to see the exciting parts. Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy. How many times had she heard similar complaints from her own son when work had pulled her away from his school events and sports games? Tell you what, she said, struck by sudden inspiration. If Dr. Chen says it's medically safe, what if we set up a secure video feed? You could watch the presentation from here. Sarah's eyes widened. Really? Only if it's approved, Eleanor said, looking to the doctor. Dr. Chen considered. As long as she stays in bed and it doesn't overly excite her, I suppose a short video call would be acceptable, strictly as a therapeutic morale booster. Sarah's smile was radiant. Thank you. I promise I'll rest extra hard before and after. Eleanor smiled, charmed by the girl's enthusiasm. She texted Frank with the update and the plan for the video feed, receiving a grateful response moments later. As the morning wore on, Eleanor found herself drawn into Sarah's world, a remarkable blend of childhood wonder and prodigious intellect. Sarah told her about the science fiction novels. She loved her fascination with quantum mechanics and her dream of someday building a true quantum computer. Dad says that will change everything. All the encryption we use now would be obsolete. Sarah explained, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. That's why the work you and Dad are doing is so important. Quantum-resistant security needs to be ready before quantum computers become practical. Your father taught you all this? Eleanor asked, impressed by the depth of the child's understanding. Some of it, the rest I learned from books and online courses. Sarah shrugged, as if this were perfectly normal for an 8-year-old. Dad makes sure I learn other stuff too, art and music and history. He says being well-rounded is important. He's right, Eleanor said. Technical skills are valuable, but understanding people and culture, that's equally important. That's what Mom used to say, Sarah said quietly. Dad has her picture on his nightstand. Sometimes I hear him talking to her at night when he thinks I'm asleep. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. He must have loved her very much. He did. Sarah looked down at her hands. Mom made him promise to be happy again someday. Before she died, I heard them. Dad tries, but she trailed off suddenly, looking every bit her 8 years. A child who had witnessed too much loss, too much struggle. Eleanor reached out, smoothing a strand of hair from Sarah's forehead. Your dad is one of the strongest people I've ever met, and so are you. Sarah looked up, a tentative smile returning. Do you think we can really save your company? I think we have a fighting chance thanks to you. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Get some rest now. The big presentation is only a few hours away. At 11:45 a.m., Frank arrived at the hospital carrying a small duffel bag of clothes for Sarah and a tablet computer. How is she? He asked as Eleanor met him in the hallway outside Sarah's room. Much better. Fever's down, appetite's back, and she's been telling me all about quantum computing. Frank smiled, relief evident in his features. That's my girl. Never misses a chance to educate someone. She's remarkable, Frank. Truly. His eyes softened. Thank you for staying with her. I know what you risked by missing those preparation hours. I wouldn't have been anywhere else, Eleanor said simply. They stood in the corridor, an unspoken current passing between them, something deeper than gratitude or professional respect. Something neither of them had anticipated when they met in that basement archive less than 48 hours ago. Frank broke the moment, first gesturing to the tablet he carried. The prototype is ready. I've loaded a presentation version that can run on this. Simplified interface, but it demonstrates all the core principles. And Sarah's solution works perfectly. She found an elegant way to bridge the theoretical framework your father designed with modern implementation standards. It's extraordinary. Frank shook his head in wonderment. I've been in this field for decades and I've never seen anything quite like it. Like father, like daughter, Eleanor said with a smile. Frank's expression grew serious. There's something else you should know. While I was finalizing the prototype, I dug deeper into the connection between James and his father's dispute with Thomas. I found something concerning. Eleanor tensed. What is it? Emails from James to Global Tech's acquisitions team. Not recent ones. These go back 3 years. 3 years, Eleanor echoed, disbelief evident in her voice. But the acquisition discussions only started 6 months ago. That's what he told you, Frank said grimly. But according to these exchanges, he's been planning this takeover for much longer. There's a specific reference to something called Operation Legacy Wipe. Legacy Wipe? Eleanor felt a chill run through her. What does that mean? It seems to be their plan for after the acquisition. They're not just going to rebrand Harrington's technology, they're going to systematically erase every reference to Thomas Harrington's contributions to the industry. Rewrite the company history, claim key innovations as their own. Eleanor's hands curled into fists at her sides. This isn't just business. It's personal. Deeply personal, Frank agreed. I think James has been positioning himself for years, waiting for the perfect moment to not just acquire your company, but to destroy your father's legacy completely. Eleanor took a deep breath, processing this betrayal. Does he know about Phoenix? No indications in the emails I found. But if he knew we were working on it, that's why he moved up the board meeting, Eleanor realized. He must have suspected we were up to something when he saw the archive materials in my apartment. Frank nodded. We need to be careful. James has been planning this for years. He won't give up easily. We should go in separately, Eleanor decided. You enter through the R&D department. I'll go in through the executive entrance. We'll meet in the boardroom at 12:55. Good idea, less chance of being intercepted. Eleanor checked her watch. The meeting starts in just over an hour. I should get going. Need to change and prepare my opening statement. Frank hesitated, then reached out briefly, taking her hand. Be careful, Eleanor. James has more at stake here than you realized. So do I, she replied, squeezing his hand before letting go. It's not just about the company anymore. Eleanor returned to her apartment with barely 45 minutes before the board meeting. She showered quickly, washing away the hospital antiseptic smell, and changed into her most authoritative suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes paired with a deep blue blouse that brought out her eyes. As she fastened her mother's pearl necklace, a talisman she wore for every critical negotiation, her phone rang. The screen displayed James Whitfield's name. She hesitated, then answered, James, I was just heading to the office. Ellie. His voice was warm, concerned, the same tone he had perfected over decades of corporate maneuvering. I've been trying to reach you all morning. Where have you been? Handling a personal matter? She replied, deliberately vague. Well, I'm glad I caught you. There's been another development. Global Tech is getting cold feet about the acquisition. They're sending their senior legal team to the meeting. This could get complicated. Eleanor recognized the tactic. Create anxiety position himself as an ally in navigating the supposed complication. How had she missed this manipulative pattern for so many years? I'm sure we can handle it, she said neutrally. I'll see you at the meeting, James. See you. Ellie, wait. She ended the call, slipping the phone into her purse. James was trying to unnerve her, perhaps hoping she would arrive flustered or unprepared. It wouldn't work. Not today. Eleanor took one last look in the mirror. The woman who stared back was not the desperate CEO who had sat in a basement archive with a bottle of pills 2 nights ago. This woman had purpose, allies, and a fighting chance. The Harrington Systems executive floor was unusually busy for a Sunday. Eleanor noted several unfamiliar faces as she made her way toward the boardroom. Global Tech representatives no doubt brought in to apply additional pressure. She entered her office first, needing a moment to center herself. On her desk sat a framed photograph of her father, Thomas Harrington, in his workshop surrounded by circuit boards and technical diagrams, his sleeve rolled up to reveal an ink-stained forearm. We'll protect what you built, Dad, she whispered, touching the frame lightly. I promise. A soft knock at her door pulled her attention away. Harold Jenkins, the oldest board member and her father's friend, stood in the doorway. Harold, Eleanor said, genuinely pleased to see him. I didn't expect you until the meeting. Thought I'd come early. The elderly man entered, closing the door behind him. Strange atmosphere today. Lot of Global Tech people. James is strutting around like he's already CEO. Eleanor smiled thinly. He's getting ahead of himself. Harold studied her face. You're up to something, aren't you? I know that look. Thomas had the same one when he was about to unveil something revolutionary. Let's just say I'm not going down without a fight. Good, Harold nodded approvingly. I've been uncomfortable with this whole deal from the start. Selling to Global Tech feels like betraying Thomas's vision, but the numbers James presented were compelling. Were they, Eleanor asked carefully, or were they carefully selected to support a predetermined outcome? Harold's bushy eyebrows rose. What are you saying, Ellie? I'm saying there's more to this acquisition than financial considerations. Much more. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Harold, do you remember Richard Whitfield? The old man's face darkened. Thomas's colleague who tried to steal his patents. Of course. Nasty business. That was James's father. Harold stared at her comprehension slowly dawning. Good Lord, you think this is some sort of revenge? I have evidence suggesting exactly that. James has been planning this for years. Not just to acquire Harrington, but to systematically erase my father's contributions to the industry. Harold sank into a chair, his face pale. I knew James was ambitious, but this is monstrous. I need your support in there today, Harold, not just for me, but for what Thomas stood for. The old man straightened, a spark of the engineer he had once been returning to his eyes. You'll have it. What's the plan? At precisely 12:55 p.m., Eleanor entered the boardroom. The long oak table was surrounded by board members, Global Tech executives, and legal representatives. James sat at the far end, her seat traditionally, engaged in animated conversation with Margaret Chen, Global Tech's head of acquisitions. Conversations died as Eleanor entered, all eyes turning toward her. She noted Frank was already present, sitting unobtrusively in a corner with the tablet computer on his lap. They exchanged the briefest of glances, a silent confirmation that everything was ready. Good afternoon, Eleanor said, taking her rightful place at the head of the table. I see we have quite a gathering today. James rose smoothly. Ellie, we were just discussing the logistics of the transition. Margaret has some concerns about— I'm sure she does, Eleanor interrupted pleasantly. But before we get to Global Tech's concerns, I'd like to address the board directly. A murmur ran through the room. James's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Ellie, we're on a tight schedule. The acquisition documents are prepared and Global Tech's team needs to return to San Francisco tonight. This won't take long, Eleanor assured him, her voice carrying the authority that had led Harrington Systems for 2 decades. The board deserves to hear certain information before making their final decision. Harold Jenkins spoke up. I agree. As the senior board member, I believe we should hear what Eleanor has to say. James hesitated, then nodded with forced graciousness. Of course, the floor is yours, Ellie. Eleanor stood surveying the room. These people had been her colleagues, her advisors, some even her friends. How many truly understood what was at stake? For 40 years, she began, Harrington Systems has stood for something unique in the technology industry. When my father built this company, he wasn't just creating another tech startup. He was establishing a vision that innovation should serve human needs, not just quarterly profits. That technology should be built to last, not designed for obsolescence. She moved around the table, making eye contact with each board member. We've been presented with an acquisition offer from Global Tech that on paper appears financially advantageous. The numbers look good. The projections seem sound. But what hasn't been made clear to this board is the true nature of what we're giving up and why this particular acquisition is being pursued. James shifted in his seat. Ellie, we've been through all this. Have we, James? Eleanor fixed him with a steady gaze. Have we discussed Operation Legacy Wipe? A visible jolt ran through him. For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, revealing genuine shock that she knew the term. I don't know what you're talking about. He recovered quickly. Is this some kind of delay tactic? It's the name of Global Tech's post-acquisition plan, Eleanor said, addressing the board rather than James. A systematic program to erase Thomas Harrington's contributions to the technology industry, to rewrite our company's history, claim our innovations as their own, and eliminate every trace of what made Harrington Systems unique. Murmurs of concern spread around the table. Margaret Chen leaned forward, her expression carefully neutral. Ms. Harrington, these are serious allegations. Global Tech has nothing but respect for your company's heritage. Then perhaps you can explain these emails, Eleanor said, nodding to Harold, who distributed printed copies of the correspondence Frank had discovered. Communications between James Whitfield and Global Tech's acquisition team dating back 3 years, long before this board was ever informed of acquisition discussions. The room fell silent as board members began reading. James's face had gone pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. Where did you get these? He demanded. They were in the company archives, Eleanor replied evenly, along with something else the board should see. She turned to Frank. Mr. Miller, would you join me, please? Frank rose, bringing the tablet with him. As he approached the table, James's eyes narrowed in recognition. The maintenance man, he said incredulously. What is this, Ellie? This, Eleanor said, is Frank Miller, and he's not just a maintenance worker. Frank, would you please introduce yourself properly to the board? Frank stepped forward, his posture straight, his voice steady. My name is Frank Miller. I was a senior systems engineer at IBM in the 1980s, where I helped develop portions of the DOS operating system. Later, I worked at Microplex Systems as a security architecture specialist. And in the 1990s, I collaborated with Thomas Harrington on Project Eagle, the encryption system that became Harrington's flagship technology. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Board members exchanged glances, reassessing the unassuming man before them. For the past 15 years, Frank continued, I've worked as part of the maintenance staff here at Harrington. But this weekend, at Eleanor's request, I returned to my original profession to help complete something Thomas Harrington began before his death. Eleanor nodded to Frank, who activated the tablet. The boardroom's main display screen illuminated, showing the Phoenix interface. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Project Phoenix, Eleanor announced. My father's final innovation, a revolutionary approach to supply chain security that he was developing just before his death in 1995. With Frank's help and the remarkable contributions of his daughter Sarah, we've created a working prototype that demonstrates its potential. For the next 10 minutes, Eleanor and Frank presented Phoenix to the stunned board. They explained its core principles, demonstrated its functionality, and outlined its potential applications in modern supply chain management. As they spoke, Eleanor noted the shifting expressions around the table, initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest, even excitement. This isn't just theoretical, Eleanor concluded. Phoenix represents a leap forward in secure verification technology, and it proves that Harrington Systems still has the innovative capacity that made us leaders in the first place. Harold Jenkins was the first to speak. This is extraordinary, Ellie. Why weren't we informed about this project earlier? Because it wasn't ready, Eleanor answered honestly. My father never completed it. The concept was preserved in our archives, but it's taken until now, with Frank's expertise and Sarah's brilliant insights, to bring it to functional prototype stage. Convenient timing, James interjected, having recovered his composure. A last-minute miracle project to derail a carefully negotiated acquisition. The board shouldn't be swayed by theatrical displays of nostalgia. This isn't nostalgia, James, Eleanor countered. It's innovation. The very thing you claimed Harrington had lost under my leadership. She turned back to the board. But Phoenix isn't the only reason to reconsider this acquisition. There's another factor the board should be aware of. A personal one. Eleanor picked up one of the email printouts. These communications reveal that James's motivation for orchestrating this sale goes beyond business. It's about settling an old score. What are you talking about? James demanded, though his eyes betrayed his knowledge. I'm talking about your father, Richard Whitfield, and his dispute with my father over patent rights at MIT. Eleanor's voice was calm but carried throughout the room. A legal battle that Thomas Harrington won and that apparently has fueled a decades-long grudge. James's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. Ancient history has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with why we're here today, Eleanor interrupted. You've spent years positioning yourself to take control of Harrington Systems, not for its business potential, but to dismantle my father's legacy, to rewrite history in your father's favor. The boardroom fell silent. Even the global tech representatives looked uncomfortable, glancing between James and Eleanor with new wariness. James rose slowly, his expression hardening. You've clearly gone to extraordinary lengths to salvage your position, Ellie. Making up conspiracy theories, dragging my family into this, even recruiting the maintenance staff to create some half-baked prototype. Phoenix is far from half-baked, Frank interjected. It's built on principles that were decades ahead of their time. And with proper development, it could revolutionize supply chain security. James dismissed this with a wave. The board isn't composed of technical experts. They can't evaluate the validity of these claims. What they can evaluate is the solid financial offer on the table from global tech, an offer that provides certainty in an uncertain market. At what cost? Eleanor challenged. Not just financial, but ethical. Are we willing to sell Harrington's soul to betray everything Thomas Harrington built? Margaret Chen cleared her throat. Perhaps in light of these developments, global tech should reconsider certain aspects of the acquisition terms. James turned to her in alarm. Margaret, we had an agreement. Business conditions have changed, she replied smoothly. If Harrington possesses viable proprietary technology that wasn't disclosed in the due diligence process, that changes the valuation metrics. Eleanor saw her opening. I propose that we postpone the acquisition vote pending a full evaluation of Project Phoenix by an independent technical committee. If the technology proves viable, we can renegotiate terms that better reflect Harrington's true value and that preserve our company's identity and history. Harold Jenkins nodded approvingly. A reasonable suggestion. I move that we accept Eleanor's proposal. I second, another board member added quickly. James looked around the table, seeing the momentum shifting away from him. His carefully constructed plan was unraveling before his eyes. This is a mistake, he said, his voice tight with suppressed fury. Global tech won't wait forever. The market is volatile. The opportunity could be lost. Or, Eleanor countered, we could discover that Harrington Systems has more to offer as an independent company than as a subdivision of global tech, that our greatest innovations may still lie ahead of us. Harold called for a vote. One by one, the board members indicated their positions. When the tally was complete, the result was clear. The acquisition vote would be postponed pending evaluation of Phoenix. James stared at Eleanor with undisguised hostility. This isn't over, Ellie. No, she agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. It's just beginning. As the meeting broke up, board members gathered around Frank, eager to learn more about Phoenix and his history with Thomas Harrington. The global tech representatives huddled with their legal team, clearly reassessing their strategy. Eleanor stepped away from the commotion, moving to a quiet corner of the room. She pulled out her phone and connected to the hospital's secure video system. Sarah's face appeared on the screen, tired but beaming. Did it work? Did you win? We won the first round, Eleanor told her with a smile. Thanks to you and your dad. The board was very impressed with Phoenix. I knew it. Sarah's excitement was tempered by a yawn she couldn't suppress. Get some rest now, Eleanor instructed gently. Your dad will be there soon. Are you coming too? Sarah asked, her voice hopeful. The question caught Eleanor off guard. 3 days ago, she had been a solitary figure, disconnected from genuine human bonds, considering ending her life in a forgotten archive room. Now this child was looking at her with expectation, with trust. Yes, Eleanor found herself saying, I'll come too. After ending the call, she rejoined Frank, who was finishing his explanations to the last of the curious board members. That went better than I expected, he said quietly as they walked toward the elevator. We've only won a reprieve, Eleanor cautioned. James won't give up easily. No, Frank agreed, but you've shown the board there's another path, and Phoenix is real. With proper development, it could be everything your father envisioned and more. As they descended in the elevator, a comfortable silence fell between them. The events of the past 72 hours had forged a connection neither had anticipated. The CEO and the maintenance worker united by shared purpose, mutual respect, and perhaps something deeper. Sarah's waiting for us, Eleanor said as they reached the lobby. Frank glanced at her, a question in his eyes. Us? If that's okay, she added, suddenly uncertain. I promised her I'd come. A slow smile warmed Frank's weathered face. I think she'd like that very much. As they walked through the lobby toward the exit, the security guard called out to Frank. Hey, Miller, forget something. Frank paused, turning back. What's that, John? The guard held up a worn leather portfolio. Found this in the break room when I was doing rounds. Isn't it yours? Frank crossed to the desk, taking the portfolio with a look of surprise. I thought I'd lost this years ago. What is it? Eleanor asked as they continued toward the parking garage. Frank ran his hand over the aged leather. My old designs, concepts I developed over the years but never had the chance to implement. Ideas that might have changed things if I hadn't been... He trailed it off. Sidelined, Eleanor finished for him, like Phoenix was. Yes. As they reached Eleanor's Tesla, she turned to him. Perhaps it's time those ideas saw the light of day too. Frank looked at her with an expression of cautious hope. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Eleanor said carefully, that Harrington Systems might benefit from a chief technology officer who understands both where we've been and where we could go. Someone who builds things to last. Frank's breath caught. Eleanor, You don't have to answer now, she interrupted gently. It's been an overwhelming few days, but think about it, Frank. What we accomplished with Phoenix in just 48 hours. Imagine what we could do with proper time and resources. She unlocked the car the moment suspended between them, filled with possibility, with promises not yet spoken but felt nonetheless. Sarah's waiting, Frank said finally, and I think I promised her ice cream if the presentation went well. Eleanor smiled. Then we shouldn't disappoint her. As they drove through Boston's Sunday afternoon traffic, Eleanor found herself contemplating the strange turns that had brought her to this moment. 3 days ago, she had been ready to end everything in that basement archive. Now she was driving to a hospital to celebrate a small victory with a maintenance worker turned potential CTO and his remarkable daughter. Life, it seemed, still had surprises to offer, chapters yet to be written. Frank sat beside her, the leather portfolio in his lap, occasionally glancing at her with an expression that suggested he too was marveling at the improbable path that had brought them together. Do you think James will fight back? He asked, eventually breaking the comfortable silence. Without question, Eleanor replied. Today was just the first skirmish in what could be a long war. He's invested too much in this revenge plot to abandon it easily. We should look deeper into those emails, Frank suggested. There might be more evidence of his true motives, maybe even leverage we could use. Agreed, but we need to be careful. James has allies throughout the company, people loyal to him, or at least to his vision of Harrington's future. You have allies too, Frank pointed out. Harold Jenkins, for one. He practically glowed when you mentioned Phoenix. Eleanor smiled at the memory. Harold and my father were friends for 50 years. He recognized what was at stake today. They fell silent again as Eleanor navigated the hospital parking garage. Before they exited the car, Frank turned to her. Whatever happens next, he said quietly, I want you to know that working on Phoenix these past few days, it reminded me of something I thought I'd lost. The joy of creating something meaningful, something that matters. I felt it too, Eleanor admitted. For years I've been so focused on preserving what my father built that I forgot about the excitement of building something new. Their eyes met a current of understanding passing between them. Two people who had each in their own way lost sight of what truly gave their work meaning, finding it again in the most unexpected circumstances. The moment was interrupted by Eleanor's phone ringing. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. Eleanor Harrington, she answered. Miss Harrington, this is Dr. Chen. The doctor's voice was tense. You need to come quickly. There's been a complication with Sarah. Frank registered the change in Eleanor's expression immediately. What is it? What's wrong? Eleanor ended the call, her heart racing. We need to hurry. Sarah's condition has worsened. They rushed through the hospital corridors, Frank's face tight with fear. When they reached Sarah's room, they found it filled with medical staff, Dr. Chen directing their efforts with calm efficiency. Sarah lay small and pale against the white sheets, an oxygen mask over her face monitors beeping with alarming rapidity. What happened? Frank demanded, pushing forward. Dr. Chen pulled them aside. Her fever spiked suddenly. We're seeing signs of pneumonia developing, not uncommon with her history of respiratory vulnerability. We're starting her on stronger antibiotics and respiratory support. She was fine when I spoke to her, Eleanor said, bewilderment mixing with concern. She was excited about Phoenix. These infections can escalate quickly, especially in immunocompromised patients, Dr. Chen explained. Her body was already fighting one infection. This may be an opportunistic secondary infection. Frank moved to Sarah's bedside, taking her small hand in his. I'm here, kiddo. Dad's right here. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, finding her father's face. She tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled her words. Don't try to talk, Frank soothed. Just focus on breathing. Everything's going to be okay. Eleanor hung back, feeling suddenly like an intruder in this intensely personal moment. The connection she had formed with Sarah over the morning seemed presumptuous now in the face of the genuine bond between father and daughter. As if sensing her withdrawal, Frank looked up, his eyes finding hers across the room. He extended his free hand, a silent invitation. Eleanor moved forward, taking his offered hand and joining him at Sarah's bedside. Together, they stood watching the medical team work, bound by shared concern for this extraordinary child who had in the space of a weekend changed both their lives. She's strong, Eleanor whispered, echoing the reassurance she had offered earlier. She'll pull through this. Frank nodded, his grip tightening on both Eleanor's hand and his daughter's. She has to. She's all I have. The simple truth of those words hung in the air between them as Sarah's monitors continued their urgent beeping, measuring the struggle taking place within her small body. Outside the hospital window, the Sunday afternoon sun cast long shadows across Boston. The Harrington Systems building stood tall among the city's skyscrapers, its future uncertain but fighting for survival, much like the child in the hospital bed. The battle for the company had been postponed, but a far more important battle was being waged in this sterile room, one that put all corporate concerns into stark perspective. Eleanor Harrington, who had spent decades focused on preserving her father's legacy, found herself praying for something far more precious. Eleanor Harrington, who had spent decades focused on preserving her father's legacy, found herself praying for something far more precious, the future of a brilliant little girl who had reminded her what truly mattered. The world could wait. The company could wait. Even James Whitfield's revenge could wait. Right now, there was only this room, this moment, and the silent, fierce hope that Sarah would open her eyes again, ready to take on the world with her remarkable mind and indomitable spirit. As the medical team worked and the monitors beeped, Eleanor and Frank maintained their vigil, hands clasped, united in a way neither could have imagined when they met in that dark basement archive. Not as CEO and maintenance worker, but simply as two human beings facing life's fragility together. Always another chapter, Frank whispered, repeating the words he had offered Eleanor in her darkest moment. Always another chapter. Eleanor squeezed his hand in silent agreement, hoping desperately that Sarah's story was far from over, that the most brilliant chapters were yet to be written. Tôi sẽ viết fan 5 của kịch bản với dung lượng từ bốn khuyên đến bốn năm Tôi sẽ tiếp tục phát triển câu chuyện từ điểm kết thúc của fan phố bao gồm một khủng hoảng lớn với tình trạng sức khỏe của Sarah, 2. Twist number 6 âm mưu lớn hơn của James, 3. Twist mà giải pháp bất ngờ, 4. Đối đầu tối hậu. Khi hoàn thành, tôi sẽ thông báo tổng số từ chính xác. Single Dad rescues beautiful show part 9 final crisis and resolution. Hours passed in the hospital room marked by the steady beep of monitors and the quiet efficiency of medical staff. Dr. Chen had ordered additional tests concerned about the rapid deterioration in Sarah's condition. Frank hadn't left his daughter's side, his weathered face etched with worry as he watched her labored breathing. Eleanor stepped out briefly to make necessary calls, postponing meetings and delegating urgent matters to her executive team. The news of the board's decision to delay the global tech acquisition had spread through the company like wildfire, igniting speculation and, in some quarters, hope. When she returned to Sarah's room, she found Frank speaking softly to his unconscious daughter and telling her about the board's reaction to Phoenix, describing Harold Jenkins' excitement and the look on James's face when the vote went against him. His voice was steady, but the strain showed in the tight set of his shoulders, the way his hand trembled slightly as he smoothed Sarah's hair. "She can hear you," Eleanor said quietly, resuming her place on the other side of the bed. "They say hearing is the last sense to go and the first to return." Frank nodded without looking up. "Lisa was in a coma for 3 days before she died. I talked to her the whole time, telling her about Sarah's first steps, her first words. All the things she was going to miss." His voice caught. "I can't go through that again. Not with Sarah." Eleanor reached across the bed, taking his hand. "You won't have to. Sarah is strong and she has the best medical care possible." "I should have seen the signs earlier," Frank said, guilt lacing his words. "She was working too hard on Phoenix, pushing herself beyond her limits. I know how she gets when she's excited about a project." "This isn't your fault," Eleanor insisted. "Children get sick, even brilliant ones with extraordinary fathers." Before Frank could respond, Dr. Chen entered, her expression grave as she studied the latest test results. She gestured for them to join her in the hallway. "Sarah's infection has developed into pneumonia complicated by her compromised immune system," she explained without preamble. "We're dealing with a resistant strain that isn't responding adequately to our standard antibiotic protocols." Frank's face drained of color. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to try something more aggressive. There's an experimental treatment, a targeted immunotherapy combined with next-generation antibiotics that's shown promising results in similar cases." "What are the risks?" Eleanor asked, seeing that Frank was momentarily speechless with fear. "Significant," Dr. Chen admitted. "The treatment is powerful and Sarah's system is already stressed. But without it," she left the sentence unfinished, its conclusion hanging in the air between them. "Do it," Frank said, his voice rough with emotion. "Whatever gives her the best chance." Dr. Chen nodded. "I'll need to get special approval and have the medication flown in from our research facility in New York. It will take a few hours." "Cost is not an issue," Eleanor said immediately. "Use my private jet if it helps expedite things." "That would help significantly," Dr. Chen acknowledged. "I'll make the arrangements." As the doctor moved away to coordinate the emergency transport, Frank turned to Eleanor, his eyes reflecting a complex mix of gratitude and pride. "You don't have to do this. The company jet covering the cost—" "Yes, I do," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Sarah is important to me, too." A notification chimed on Eleanor's phone. She glanced at it, then frowned. "That's odd. Security alert from Harrington Systems. Someone's accessed the R&D lab using my credentials." "But your credentials are with you," Frank said, immediately alert. "Exactly. Someone's using a cloned access key." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Only a handful of people have that kind of override capability." "James," Frank said, not a question, but a statement. "Most likely." Eleanor was already dialing the head of security. "John, this is Eleanor Harrington. I need you to check the R&D lab immediately. Someone's using unauthorized access." "Yes, I'm aware it shows as my credentials, but I'm not in the building." "No, do not confront them. Just confirm who it is and what they're doing." She ended the call, her mind racing. This can't be a coincidence. The board meeting, Sarah's sudden relapse, now someone breaking into the lab where we developed Phoenix. "You think James is involved in Sarah's condition?" Frank asked, disbelief warring with growing anger. "I don't know," Eleanor admitted, "but it's a remarkable coincidence that she deteriorated so rapidly right after our victory at the board meeting." Frank's face darkened. If he's done anything to harm her. Let's not jump to conclusions, Eleanor cautioned, though her own suspicions were mounting. First, let's find out what's happening at the lab. Her phone rang. John from security. As Harrington, we have visual confirmation. It's Mr. Whitfield and two men from Global Tech. They're downloading data from the terminal you were using yesterday. Phoenix, Frank whispered, comprehension dawning. They're stealing Phoenix. Eleanor's mind shifted into crisis management mode. John, I need you to shut down that terminal remotely. Security protocol avalanche full system lockdown. Yes, ma'am. Should I have them detained? Eleanor hesitated. James was still CFO, still had legitimate access to most company systems. A direct confrontation now could backfire legally. No, just secure the data. I'll handle James myself. After ending the call, she turned to Frank. I need to go back to Harrington. If James gets his hands on Phoenix and delivers it to Global Tech before the technical evaluation, it changes everything. They could claim it was already part of their acquisition assessment. Frank nodded, understanding the stakes. Go, I'll stay with Sarah. I'll be back as soon as I can, Eleanor promised, gathering her purse and keys. At the door, she paused. Frank, be careful. If there's any connection between James's actions and Sarah's condition, I won't leave her side, he assured her, his expression grim. And Eleanor, whatever James is planning, don't face him alone. He's already proven he's willing to go to extreme lengths for his revenge. The drive to Harrington Systems took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Eleanor's mind worked furiously, connecting dots that had seemed disparate before. James's unexplained access to highly secure areas. The convenient timing of Sarah's relapse. The 3-year conspiracy to orchestrate the Global Tech acquisition. Just how far would James Whitfield go to erase Thomas Harrington's legacy and replace it with his father's? When she arrived at the Harrington building, security informed her that James and his Global Tech associates had left shortly after the system lockdown, visibly angry, but claiming they were simply securing company assets before the transition. Eleanor went directly to the R&D lab, where the security team had preserved the scene. The terminal showed evidence of a sophisticated attempt to download the Phoenix prototype and its supporting documentation, an attempt that had been partially successful before the lockdown protocol engaged. How much did they get? She asked the IT security specialist examining the system. About 30% of the code base and some of the conceptual framework, he replied. Not enough to reconstruct the full system, but enough to understand its fundamental approach. Eleanor nodded grimly. Enhanced security on all remaining data. Full biometric verification for any access, even mine. As the IT team worked, her phone rang. The hospital. Eleanor's heart lurched as she answered. It's Frank, came the strained voice. They've started Sarah on the experimental treatment, but Dr. Chen says the next 12 hours are critical. And Eleanor, there's something else. The lab found traces of an unusual compound in Sarah's blood work, something that wasn't there in her initial tests. What kind of compound? They're still analyzing it, but Dr. Chen says it's not something that would naturally occur with her infection. It's almost like her condition was deliberately accelerated. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. I'm coming back, Eleanor said immediately. No, Frank countered. If James is behind this, if he's that desperate to get Phoenix, you need to protect it. Sarah is stable for now, and she has a whole medical team watching over her. Eleanor hesitated, torn between her concern for Sarah and the need to secure her father's legacy. There's one more thing, Frank added, his voice lowering. When I was looking through Sarah's backpack for her comfort item, that stuffed triceratops she loves, I found something strange. A small electronic device like a thumb drive, but it's not something I gave her. Don't touch it, Eleanor warned. It could be monitoring equipment or worse. Have security sweep the room for any other devices. Already done. They found nothing else, but they're taking this one to the lab for analysis. Eleanor's mind raced. James must have planted it when we were all working on Phoenix. He knew we were onto something, but needed to know exactly what. Sarah was the vulnerable point, the one person whose belongings wouldn't be thoroughly checked. Using a child, Frank's voice was tight with controlled rage. If he's responsible for her condition, we'll prove it, Eleanor assured him, and he'll pay. I promise you that. After ending the call, Eleanor summoned her executive team for an emergency meeting. In the boardroom where just hours earlier they had won their reprieve from global tech, she now outlined the situation in stark terms: the data breach attempt, the suspicious circumstances of Sarah's illness, and the discovery of the monitoring device. James has crossed a line, she told them. This is no longer just about a corporate acquisition. It's about illegal activities that may include corporate espionage, unauthorized data access, and potentially something far worse. Her general counsel spoke up. Ms. Harrington, these are serious allegations against our CFO. We need solid evidence before taking any official action. I understand, Eleanor acknowledged. That's why I'm not asking for official action yet. But I need your vigilance. Secure your department's limit information sharing and report any unusual activities directly to me. As the team dispersed, Harold Jenkins remained behind his elderly face grave. I've known James since he was a boy, Ellie. Richard Whitfield brought him to company picnics, introduced him to Thomas. I never imagined he could harbor such deep resentment. Grievances can fester across generations, Eleanor said, especially when they're nurtured by a parent's bitterness. What's your next move? Eleanor considered. James doesn't know we've discovered the monitoring device or that we suspect Sarah's condition was deliberately induced. That gives us an advantage. He thinks we're distracted, vulnerable. A trap, then? Harold suggested, a spark of the strategic thinker he had once been returning to his eyes. Precisely. Eleanor smiled thinly. I believe it's time to invite our CFO to a private conversation about the future of Phoenix. James Whitfield arrived at Eleanor's office precisely at the appointed time, his manner composed but with an underlying tension that hadn't been present before. He wore the same practiced expression of concern he had perfected over decades in corporate politics. Ellie, I came as soon as I got your message. How's the maintenance man's daughter? Eleanor noted his deliberate diminishment of Frank and Sarah, the subtle attempt to reestablish the social hierarchy that had been upended in the boardroom. Sarah is fighting for her life, she replied, her voice neutral. The doctors are doing everything they can. I'm sorry to hear that, James said with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. Children are so vulnerable. Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her desk. Thank you for coming, James. I wanted to speak with you privately about where we go from here. James settled into the chair, his posture relaxed but alert. I appreciate that, Ellie. Despite our disagreements, we've been friends for too long to let business come between us. Friends, Eleanor echoed, letting the word hang in the air. Yes, that's what I thought too, for 40 years. Something flickered in James's eyes, wariness perhaps, but his expression remained pleasant. The board's decision was a setback but not a disaster. Global Tech is still interested in acquiring Harrington. They're simply recalibrating their approach in light of this Phoenix project. That's actually what I wanted to discuss, Eleanor said, leaning forward. Phoenix represents something significant, not just technologically, but symbolically. It's my father's final innovation, his last gift to the company. And it appears to have considerable potential, James acknowledged smoothly, which is why Global Tech remains interested. But under what terms, Eleanor pressed? Would Phoenix remain intact, attributed to its creators? Or would it be absorbed into Global Tech's portfolio, its origins obscured? James's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Technology evolves, Ellie. Attribution becomes a historical footnote at best. Like Operation Legacy Wipe, Eleanor asked quietly. James went very still, his eyes never leaving her face. I've already told you I don't know what you're talking about. Eleanor opened her laptop, turning the screen toward him. On it was displayed one of the emails they had discovered with the damning phrase highlighted, "Proceed with Operation Legacy Wipe as planned." Your own words, James. To Global Tech's acquisition team. 3 years ago. James studied the email, his composure remarkable, even as his scheme unraveled before him. Corporate communications can be easily misinterpreted out of context. Then perhaps you can explain the context of using a monitoring device to spy on a child. Eleanor continued, placing the small electronic device they had found in Sarah's backpack on the desk between them. Or the unusual compound that suddenly appeared in her bloodstream after she helped develop the breakthrough that threatened your plans. At this, James's mask slipped, genuine alarm replacing his calculated calm. Ellie, you can't possibly think I had anything to do with the girl's illness. That's absurd. Is it? Eleanor challenged. A perfectly healthy child suddenly develops life-threatening complications immediately after helping to create the one thing that could derail your 3-year revenge plot. That's quite a coincidence. James stood abruptly. I won't sit here and be accused of harming a child. Whatever our differences, I would never stoop to something so despicable. Then explain the monitoring device, Eleanor demanded, also rising. Explain why you were in the R&D lab using cloned access credentials to steal Phoenix data. Securing company assets is part of my responsibilities as CFO, James countered, but his confidence was visibly shaken. As for any monitoring device, I know nothing about it. Then you won't mind if we turn it over to the FBI for analysis? Eleanor pressed. Along with the toxicology reports from the hospital, James paled slightly. You're making a serious mistake, Ellie. Accusations like this without proof could destroy everything. Not just for me, but for Harrington Systems. I'm trying to save what matters, James, my father's legacy, the company's future, and most importantly, the life of an extraordinary little girl who represents everything we should be nurturing in the next generation of innovators. Something shifted in James's expression, not surrender, but reassessment. You've changed, Ellie. 3 days ago, you were ready to accept the inevitable. What happened? I remembered what matters, Eleanor said simply. Something my father understood and tried to teach me, that technology without humanity is meaningless. That legacy isn't about patents and profits, but about the lives we touch, the futures we enable. James shook his head, a curious mixture of admiration and resentment in his eyes. Always the idealist, just like Thomas. But idealism doesn't survive in today's market, Ellie. Global tech will have Harrington Systems with or without board approval. What does that mean? James moved toward the door. It means I would reconsider my position if I were you. The technical evaluation of Phoenix is scheduled for tomorrow morning. A lot can happen before then. The implied threat hung in the air as he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Eleanor immediately called security. I want James Whitfield's access to all Harrington Systems revoked immediately. And I need a security detail at Massachusetts General Hospital room 412 right away. Her next call was to Frank. James just left. He denied everything but made what sounded like a threat against the Phoenix evaluation tomorrow. How's Sarah? The same, Frank replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Dr. Chen says the treatment is working as expected, but it's too soon to see the significant improvement. I'm sending additional security to the hospital, Eleanor told him. Don't let anyone you don't personally recognize into Sarah's room, not even medical staff. You think he'd try something here, in a hospital? I don't know, Eleanor admitted, but James is desperate. His entire plan is unraveling, and desperate people take desperate measures. After ending the call, Eleanor stared out at the Boston skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk approached. James's parting words echoed in her mind. A lot can happen before then. What was he planning? And how could she protect both Phoenix and Sarah from a man who had spent years orchestrating his revenge? The answer came from an unexpected source. Her phone rang. Harold Jenkins. Ellie, I think I've found something. In the old archive room, there's a safe behind the Eagle Project display case. Thomas showed it to me once, said it contained contingency plans. I think you should check it. 20 minutes later, Eleanor was in the basement archive room, the hidden safe open before her. Inside was a sealed envelope with her name written in her father's distinctive handwriting, along with a small data storage device that looked decades old. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers, unfolding the letter inside. My dear Eleanor, and it began, if you're reading this, it means you've discovered both the hidden archive and the truth about Richard Whitfield. I had hoped this knowledge would never be necessary, but I've learned that some grievances never truly die. They merely transfer to the next generation. The letter continued, detailing the full story of the dispute with Richard Whitfield, not just over patents, but over fundamental ethical principles in technology development. Thomas had prevailed legally not by superior legal maneuvering, but because Richard had attempted to patent technology developed using classified military resources, a serious ethical breach that could have resulted in criminal charges. I protected Richard from the consequences of his actions for the sake of his family, Thomas wrote. But I fear his son may someday seek to rewrite this history. If that happens, the enclosed data device contains the complete record documentation that would be devastating to the Whitfield name if made public. Eleanor stared at the small device, understanding dawning. Her father had created not just a record, but a safeguard insurance against exactly the situation she now faced. She returned to her office and carefully transferred the data to a secure system. What she found confirmed her father's warning, detailed evidence of Richard Whitfield's ethical violations. Evidence that would tarnish not only his reputation, but potentially expose James to scrutiny for similar patterns throughout his career. It was a nuclear option, one that could destroy James professionally and personally, but it was also leverage a way to protect Phoenix Harrington Systems and, most importantly, Sarah. Eleanor made one more call. "James," she said when he answered, "we need to talk. I've found something in my father's archives that changes everything." The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. Sarah remained unconscious, her small body fighting the infection with the help of the experimental treatment. Frank sat beside her, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion, but alert, watching for any sign of improvement. Eleanor entered, followed by James Whitfield. Frank immediately tensed, rising to position himself protectively between the newcomers and his daughter. "It's okay, Frank," Eleanor said quickly. "James is here to make things right." Frank's expression remained wary, his eyes never leaving James's face. "What does that mean?" James stepped forward, his usual corporate polish replaced by a subdued gravity. "It means I've withdrawn my support for the global tech acquisition. The board will receive my formal recommendation against the sale tomorrow morning." Frank looked to Eleanor for explanation. "We've reached an understanding," she said carefully. "James has seen evidence that has changed his perspective on certain historical matters." "What about Sarah?" Frank demanded, not willing to be diverted. "The monitoring device, her sudden illness." James's face registered genuine shock. "I had nothing to do with your daughter's condition, Mr. Miller. The monitoring device, yes, I admit I was desperate to know what you were developing, but I would never harm a child." "The compound in her bloodstream," Frank pressed. "Was not my doing," James insisted. "I've made many mistakes, crossed many ethical lines in my career, but that is not one of them." Eleanor placed a hand on Frank's arm. "I believe him, Frank, about Sarah at least. The hospital lab completed their analysis. The compound was an extreme allergic reaction to one of the materials in the R&D lab. A rare reaction, but not deliberate poisoning." Frank seemed to deflate slightly, the target of his rage dissolving. "Then why is he here?" "To make amends," James said quietly. "Starting with this." He placed a flash drive on the table beside Sarah's bed. "The complete Phoenix data that Global Tech extracted from the R&D system. All copies have been destroyed." Eleanor explained, "James has agreed to support Phoenix's development under Harrington Systems with full attribution to all contributors, including you, Frank and Sarah. In return," she hesitated, glancing at James, "in return, certain historical records will remain sealed." James finished, "My father's legacy is complicated enough without adding to it." Frank looked between them, understanding the unspoken negotiation that had taken place. "And Harrington Systems remains independent," Eleanor confirmed, "with a restructured board and new leadership for our financial division." James moved toward the door, pausing to look back at Sarah. "For what it's worth, Mr. Miller, your daughter's work on Phoenix is remarkable. In another world, another time, I might have been proud to foster such talent." His eyes met Eleanor's. "Your father was right about many things, Ellie. Perhaps it's time his approach had another chance." After James left, Frank turned to Eleanor. "What did you find?" "Insurance," she said simply. "My father understood Richard Whitfield better than anyone knew that the grievance might someday resurface through James. So he left evidence that would destroy the Whitfield name if made public. And you used it to save Harrington." "To save everything that matters," Eleanor corrected, moving to Sarah's bedside. "How is she?" "Dr. Chen says her vitals are improving. The fever's down slightly." "It's working, Eleanor. The treatment is working." Relief washed over Eleanor, more powerful than even the victory over James had been. "That's the best news I've heard all day." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the steady rise and fall of Sarah's chest, each breath a small victory, a promise of future brilliance preserved. "What happens now?" Frank asked eventually. "With Phoenix, with Harrington?" Eleanor considered the question, looking at the child who had helped save her father's legacy and in the process had saved Eleanor herself from despair. "Now we build something that lasts," she said softly, "together." As if in response, Sarah's eyelids fluttered. Her monitors showed a strengthening rhythm, her body beginning to win its battle against the infection. "Dad," came her weak voice muffled by the oxygen mask. Frank leaned forward, joy illuminating his tired face. "I'm here, kiddo. Right here." Sarah's eyes opened fully, finding first her father's face, then Eleanor's. A small smile formed beneath the mask. "Did we win?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Eleanor took her small hand, feeling the delicate strength returning to her fingers. "Yes, Sarah, thanks to you, we won." Outside the hospital window, the first light of dawn broke over Boston, illuminating the Harrington Systems building among the city's skyscrapers, not a monument to the past now, but a beacon for the future they would build together. A future where legacies were honored but not imprisoned by history, where innovation served humanity, not merely profit, where an unlikely alliance between a CEO, a maintenance worker, and a brilliant child had reminded the world what technology was meant to be. Always another chapter. Frank set his hand finding Eleanor's across the bed, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if they had always belonged together. Sarah's eyes moved between them, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth despite her weakness. "I told you so," she whispered. And in that moment, surrounded by beeping monitors and the antiseptic smell of the hospital room, Eleanor Harrington found something she had thought lost forever, not just purpose or legacy or even love, but home. The place where you are seen, valued, and understood. The place where you belong. 6 months later, the October afternoon painted Boston in brilliant autumn colors as a small crowd gathered in the recently renovated lobby of Harrington Systems. The space had been transformed from its former corporate sterility into a warm, welcoming environment that blended technological innovation with human connection. At the center stood the newly created Thomas Harrington Innovation Archive, a museum space chronicling the authentic history of American computing with special emphasis on the overlooked contributors whose names had often been omitted from the standard narratives. Eleanor Harrington, dressed in a tailored navy suit that complemented her silver-streaked hair, cut the ceremonial ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors. Beside her stood Frank Miller, now officially Harrington's chief technology officer, and Sarah, whose recovery had been as remarkable as her intellect. "Today we open not just a museum, but a commitment to truth," Eleanor announced to the assembled guests, "a promise that the real story of innovation, with all its complexities and collaborations and even its controversies, will be preserved for future generations." The centerpiece of the museum was a glass case containing the original Eagle Project documents displayed alongside the Phoenix prototype that had saved the company. A plaque acknowledged the contributions of both Thomas Harrington and Frank Miller to these revolutionary technologies, with a special note recognizing Sarah Miller as the youngest contributor to Phoenix's development. Nearby, a smaller display honored Richard Whitfield's early work in computing, acknowledging his significant contributions while also documenting the painful legal dispute that had tarnished his legacy. James Whitfield, who had resigned from Harrington and accepted a teaching position at MIT's business school, had declined to attend the opening. But his father's remaining colleagues from MIT had come expressing gratitude for the belated recognition. "History is rarely as simple as we want it to be," Eleanor continued, her voice carrying through the lobby. "Innovation doesn't spring from lone geniuses working in isolation. It emerges from communities of builders, from shared knowledge, from collaboration across boundaries of status and title." Her eyes found Frank's in the crowd, a private moment of connection in the public ceremony. Sometimes the most valuable contributors are the ones we least expect. The maintenance worker with a brilliant past, the child with an extraordinary mind, the competitor with a different perspective. This archive honors them all. After the formal presentations ended and the guests began exploring the exhibits, Eleanor found herself standing with Frank in a quiet corner of the lobby, watching as Sarah enthusiastically conducted an impromptu tour for several visiting school children, her expertise and passion evident in every gesture. "She's a born teacher," Eleanor observed, "among her many talents." Frank nodded, pride evident in his expression. "Keeps me on my toes. The Phoenix development team can barely keep up with her suggestions for improvements." In the months since their dramatic confrontation with James Harrington Systems had undergone a renaissance of sorts. With Eleanor firmly re-established as CEO and Frank leading the Phoenix project as chief technology architect, the company had secured major contracts with both government agencies and private sector clients interested in next-generation supply chain security. The board had been restructured, with several new members bringing fresh perspectives on the company's future. Global tech, faced with unexpected scrutiny of their acquisition practices following the Harrington incident, had quietly withdrawn from the American market, focusing instead on less regulated regions. "I had an interesting call this morning," Eleanor said, turning from the window to face Frank. "NASA is looking for partners on their Mars mission supply chain security. Apparently, Senator Harrison suggested we might have relevant technology." Frank raised an eyebrow. "From basement archives to Mars missions in 6 months. Not bad for a maintenance worker and a CEO who were both contemplating the end of their careers." "Life takes unexpected turns," Eleanor agreed, moving to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. Their relationship had evolved cautiously over the past months. Professional respect had deepened into friendship, and then something more, though neither had rushed to define it. The company grapevine buzzed with speculation about their late-night strategy sessions and weekend brainstorming meetings, but Eleanor found herself surprisingly unbothered by the gossip. For the first time in decades, her personal happiness took precedence over corporate appearances. Across the lobby, Harold Jenkins was engaged in animated conversation with a group of tech historians, his elderly face alight with the want of sharing stories about the early days of Harrington Systems. The oldest board member had become the museum's most enthusiastic supporter, volunteering as a docent 3 days a week. "Harold looks 10 years younger," Frank commented. "Purpose does that to people," Eleanor replied. "He's not just reminiscing about the past, he's shaping how a new generation understands it." As the afternoon progressed, an unexpected visitor arrived. Michael Harrington, Eleanor's son, stepped through the main entrance, looking slightly out of place in his Silicon Valley casual attire amid the more formal Boston crowd. Eleanor excused herself from a conversation with investors to greet him, surprise and pleasure mingling in her expression. "Michael, I didn't know you were coming." He embraced her briefly with the slight awkwardness that had characterized their relationship since his adolescence. "Last-minute decision. My flight got in an hour ago." "I'm so glad you're here," Eleanor said, meaning it. Their relationship had been strained for years, casualties of her devotion to the company and his subsequent alliance with his father after the divorce. "The place looks different," Michael observed, glancing around the transformed lobby. "Less corporate bunker, more, I don't know, human." Eleanor smiled. "That's exactly what we were going for." "And this is the famous Phoenix?" he asked, gesturing toward the display case. "The foundation of it. The full system is considerably more complex." Michael studied the prototype, professional interest evident in his gaze. As a venture capitalist specializing in security startups, he could appreciate the technical achievement. "It's impressive, Mom, really." "You sound surprised." He shrugged, a hint of his teenage self showing through. "The last few times we talked, you were so focused on preserving Grandpa's legacy. This feels different, forward-looking." "It is different," Eleanor acknowledged. "I've learned that the best way to honor a legacy isn't to freeze it in amber, but to build on its foundation." Michael nodded, then hesitated. "So, are you going to introduce me to him?" "To who?" "The maintenance guy who saved the company. The one who's all over the tech blogs as Harrington's new CTO. The one you haven't stopped looking at since I arrived." Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks, caught off guard by her son's perceptiveness. "I didn't realize I was being so obvious." "Mom, I haven't seen you look at anyone that way since, well, ever." Michael's expression softened. "He must be special." "He is," Eleanor admitted. He sees the world differently, values things I'd forgotten were important." "Then yes, I definitely want to meet him. And his daughter, the math prodigy everyone's talking about." Eleanor led Michael across the lobby to where Frank and Sarah were examining a historical display of early encryption devices. The introductions were brief but warm, with Sarah immediately launching into an explanation of how modern quantum encryption compared to the mechanical methods of the 1940s. As the conversation flowed, Eleanor observed the easy way Frank engaged with her son, asking thoughtful questions about his work in venture capital without a trace of the intimidation many felt around Michael's financial success. And she noted how quickly Michael responded to Frank's unpretentious expertise, professional respect visibly growing. Two parts of her life long compartmentalized were blending together with surprising harmony. Later, as the evening reception wound down and the last guest departed, Eleanor found herself alone with Frank in the museum's central space. Sarah had gone home with Harold Jenkins and his wife, who had offered to host her for a museum appreciation sleepover, their thinly veiled attempt to give Eleanor and Frank some private time. "Successful day," Frank said, loosening his tie slightly. 6 months in the C-suite hadn't entirely accustomed him to formal business attire. "Beyond my expectations," Eleanor agreed. Even the Boston Globe technology reporter was impressed, and she's notoriously hard to please. They walked slowly through the exhibits, pausing at a newly installed wall that featured photographs and biographies of the invisible innovators, technologists whose contributions had shaped the industry, but who had rarely received public recognition. Frank's photo was among them alongside his history at IBM Microplex and now Harrington. "Still feels strange," he admitted, looking at his own image. "Being visible again." "You deserve the recognition," Eleanor said. "All of you do." They stopped before the final exhibit, a time capsule that would be sealed during the ceremony containing artifacts from Harrington's past and present to be opened in 50 years. "What do you think they'll make of us in 2075? Frank asked, studying the sleek container. "Will any of this matter then?" "The technology will be obsolete," Eleanor acknowledged. "But the principles behind it, building things to last, valuing people over profits, acknowledging everyone's contributions, I hope those endure." Frank turned to her, his expression serious. "These past 6 months working together, they've been the most fulfilling of my career." "Mine too," Eleanor said softly. "Sarah and I have been talking," he continued, a hint of nervousness entering his voice. "Our lease is up next month, and with the commute from Dorchester," Eleanor felt her heart quicken. "The Beacon Hill neighborhood has excellent schools," she offered, "and my apartment has 3 bedrooms, 2 of which I never use." A smile spread across Frank's weathered face, reaching his blue eyes. "Are you suggesting a more efficient living arrangement, Ms. Harrington?" "I'm suggesting home, Mr. Miller," Eleanor replied, taking his hand. "For all of us." Frank's fingers intertwined with hers, a perfect fit despite their different paths through life. "Sarah will be thrilled. She's been not so subtly suggesting this for months. She's a very perceptive child. Too perceptive sometimes," Frank agreed with a chuckle. Then his expression grew serious again. "Eleanor, are you sure the company image?" "I've spent 40 years worrying about the company image," Eleanor said firmly. "It's time to focus on the company's heart instead, on what truly matters." As they walked through the museum toward the exit, the displays chronicling the past and pointing toward the future, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The building that had once been merely the headquarters of Harrington Systems now housed something far more precious, a truth larger than corporate success, a connection deeper than professional collaboration. They paused at the Thomas Harrington display, where her father's photograph smiled out at them, his eyes seemingly approving of the direction his company had taken. "He would have liked you," Eleanor said, "especially your stubbornness about doing things the right way instead of the easy way." "High praise," Frank responded. "I wish I'd known him better." "In many ways you did," Eleanor reflected, "through your work together, even if it was hidden from view. The best collaborations leave marks on each person involved." Outside, the Boston skyline glittered against the darkening October sky. Eleanor's Tesla waited in its reserved spot, but tonight it would carry not just the CEO of Harrington Systems, but her future family. An unlikely trio formed from shared purpose, mutual respect, and love that had grown in the most unexpected circumstances. "I should call Sarah, let her know about the change in plans," Frank said as they approached the car. "Let's surprise her tomorrow," Eleanor suggested. "Tonight is just for us." As they drove through the city streets, Eleanor glanced at Frank, still slightly amazed at the journey that had brought them together. From a desperate night in a basement archive to this moment of quiet contentment. "Always another chapter," she murmured, echoing his words from that first night. Frank reached across the console, taking her hand. The best ones, I think, are just beginning. In the rearview mirror, the Harrington Systems building receded, its windows illuminated against the night sky. No longer a monument to the past, but a beacon for a future where innovation served humanity, where legacy was honored through growth rather than stagnation, and where an unlikely alliance had transformed not just a company, but the lives of everyone involved. At the intersection, Eleanor turned not toward her Beacon Hill apartment, but toward the small restaurant where she and Frank had first shared coffee after their basement encounter. Rosie's all-night diner still defiantly unchanged amid Boston's gentrification. Feeling nostalgic, Frank asked with a smile. Feeling grateful, Eleanor corrected, for basement archives and maintenance elevators and coffee at midnight with strangers who see you clearly when no one else does. The car pulled into a parking space, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, the engine's hum fading. Some things are built to last, Frank said softly, even when everything around them changes. Eleanor leaned across the console, bridging the final distance between them, with a kiss that felt like coming home after a very long journey. Especially then, she whispered against his lips. Especially then.